Since the world was born at the beginning of chaos, the heavenly Tao has appeared. It controlled the laws of heaven and earth and also changed everything. Under the rule of the heavenly Tao, the world has gone through 2 great cycles. During the first great cycle, thousands of people painstakingly trained and cultivated to reach the realm beyond the heavenly Tao. However, people were too greedy. Not only did they steal the spiritual roots of heaven and earth, they even tried to claim to be representatives of the heavenly Tao. From this, the heavens were awakened by the greed of the world and disappointed in everything that exists. And in the end, the heavens destroyed all beings. During the second great cycle, the 3 worlds, heavenly, human and earthly, were divided into regions and were no longer the same. The west was controlled by the gods, and the east was ruled by the immortals. The earthly world was deserted and quickly turned into a wasteland. The pile of bones reached the height of mountains, and the souls of criminals turned into ghosts. The human world is somewhere between the mighty kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth, where the weak fall into the cycle of reincarnation. However, the strongest representatives of the first great cycle were not completely destroyed. Some of them have been reborn into humans and are hiding to this day. Some of the dead came back to life and also hid somewhere. But they all have the same goal, to enter the path of fate and challenge the heavenly Tao. After awakening, the heavenly Tao became very angry and unleashed a mighty thunder. For the second time, the planet was already destroyed. And now the world has entered the third great cycle. The young man, waving away, asks the flying ball to finish this story. From this narration, the guy realized that the former heavenly Tao had left the world and fled, and now he is a new heavenly Tao. The ball responds positively to this assumption. The young man jumps off a small mountain and continues the conversation with the magic ball. The guy is reborn for the first time, and he has already been given such a high status. Char replies that this guy was chosen by the system, and now he is a heavenly Tao that has unlimited power in this world. 2 men were climbing the mountain, and one of them watched the young man talking to himself. This ball is not seen by ordinary people. The guy, meanwhile, wonders why the previous heavenly Tao used only force to solve all the problems. After all, force cannot solve all problems, it can only help against enemies. Brother Zun once said that the strong use force against the stronger, and the weak use force against the weaker. But this young man is not a former heavenly Tao, and he would never have made such a low-grade mistake. While Tao was talking about the former heavenly Tao, a huge dragon flew out of the forest. His eyes were filled with rage, their red color spoke of it. The frightened people began to run away in different directions, and the young man continued to stand calmly and talk about the rank of the dragon. While the monster was preparing to attack Tao, the young man released a light flash from his little finger, which flew to the neighboring mountain and provoked an explosion, and then a hole appeared in the mountain. The dragon, turning at the sound of the explosion, saw what this guy was capable of and hurried away from there. Satisfied with his work, the young man says that even the reverse rank of the heavenly king cannot block 3 of his blows. He also added that this dragon is very smart. The ball reappeared near the guy and reminded him of his words that the strong use force only against the strong. The guy explained that he just scared the dragon. Char clarified about the use of force against opponents. Then the young man replied that he would not use force as long as negotiations were possible, and the world would not be destroyed for the 3rd time. But his peace-loving Chinese blood could not promise anything. The guy got here less than an hour ago, and he doesn't know anything about this world yet. He is not even familiar with the situation in this world. He thinks about whether he will be able to become a good heavenly Tao. Therefore, the first place in which he will stay, the young man chose a small town. Heavenly Tao is advancing towards the gates of Freedom City. Traffickers enter the city, they drive carts in which fairies sit. They discuss a good hunt and a catch for which they can make a big profit. Fairies are in great demand among the nobility here. One of the merchants notices the young man and asks if he needs slaves. He offers to buy any slave he likes for 10 gold coins. These fairies are the newest of the captured, ranging from prisoners of war to innocent girls from the village. In addition, there are children who could be raised from an early age. Tao looks through the hearts of the fairies sitting in the carriage and sees that their hearts look almost like dead. The seller again turns attention to himself and says that he has an extremely rare product. They move to the next wagon, and the man removes the cloth from it, which protected the creature from human eyes and light. In the cart there is an elf girl with long ears. There are abrasions on her legs and arms, and her expression is exhausted. The girl holds onto the metal grate with both hands, and sadness and a request for help are visible in her eyes. The merchant says that representatives of the elven race are found only on the western continent. You can get this elf for only 1,000 gold coins. Tao, after listening to his speech, silently turns around and leaves. The man calls him a poor man after him. Moving away from the traders, the young man says that human trafficking is worse than a feudal state. Then Shar asks why Tao didn't free the slaves. The guy replies that there would be no point in this. The slavers would just start kidnapping even more, and this would not solve the problem in any way. Tao points his finger at a shop with several hundred slaves, and there are such shops all over the continent. Shar replies that the young man is a heavenly Tao. If he wishes, all the slaves in the world will be freed, and all the slavers in the world will die, and all the chambers of commerce will go bankrupt. The young man does not see any sense in this action, because then another chamber will rise, which will fill the commercial void and begin a new wave of slave hunting. Unlike his predecessor, the guy thinks to solve the problem, they have to sort out the main root of the problem itself. Tao walks into this shop and is greeted by a smiling man offering various goods. All these slaves are finished products that have been well trained in their ward and are guaranteed not to escape. If one of the slaves dares to escape, the man promises to compensate everything tenfold. Then the young man decides to ask, if he releases the slaves himself, will they escape? The man, taking the words of the gentleman for a joke, replies that if he buys them and lets them go, they will not leave him anyway. Tao points to one of the slaves and asks to talk to her. The man agrees and says that if the young man is not satisfied with these slaves, then he will be able to go to the VIP room and choose others. The guy approaches the girl and asks if she wants freedom. She lowers her head down, and then Tao decides to ask if she has a lover. The slave did not expect to hear this, and the young man comes closer to the glass and decides to ask another question. He wonders if this girl wants to be a free person or remain a slave. She still answers the question, and says that she just wants to be a slave to her master. After receiving the answer, Tao asks to take him to the VIP room. The man leaves to prepare a room for his client. Having placed the kettle and treats on the table, the owner of the shop leaves, leaving the guy alone. A store employee looks out from behind the door and asks the gentleman to wait. He says that he needs to tell someone to bring exclusive VIP items to the young man. The employee leaves, leaving the young man alone. As soon as the door is closed, the guy opens the system and the protocol of the rules is ready to work. After the young man saw human trafficking, he made a firm decision. The abolition of slavery is his first task as a heavenly Tao. The system asks you to describe the rule that the heavenly Tao wants to add. The young man announces a rule. Everyone below the 5th rank and trying to trade people will see a dark silhouette that will begin to seem many times more powerful than the person himself. And when the merchant plans to commit a crime, he will be issued a warning. The system asks the question why the young man chose people below the 5th rank. Heavenly Tao explained that those above the 5th rank are immortals. They will not want to trade people and lose their authority. The young man adds that if the warning goes unheeded and the merchant does not change his mind, then the silhouette will start attacking until the person changes his mind, or until he dies. The process of developing rules begins, and the system asks for a definition. Heavenly Tao starts typing on the computer. An act of coercion, when a creature is exposed to the arena of sales, with the help of threats, for the purpose of profit, exchange of goods, in return for restricting actions by humanoid creatures. But if the slave became such voluntarily, then there is no problem. The rules are drawn up and the system asks if the Heavenly Tao is ready to make a preview. The young man clicks on yes. An employee of the shop leads the slaves to the VIP room and light rays flash before the eyes of the girls and the guy, and their faces freeze, and their eyes widen. This light falls on the whole city, which indicates that the rule has come into effect. The door to the room opens, and the young man sees a worker who keeps slaves on chains. He says that he has prepared 10 of the best goods for the gentleman. Not having had time to finish talking about a discount for the gentleman, an intimidating silhouette appears in front of the employee. The guy jumps away from the shadow in horror and asks the gentleman if he sees the same thing. The young man responds positively and asks if their ward does not meet its clients in this way. The employee's voice breaks into a scream, and he says that they are not doing it that way. Realizing that the rule is activated, the young man gets up from the sofa, takes a mug in his hand, and begins to observe what is happening. The guy points at the wall, and turning around, everyone present is shocked. A man named Andri flies out of the wall. In his hand is a huge sword, and his face and body are covered with wounds and abrasions. Heavenly Tao asks who this man is, and the shop worker tells him that this is one of the captains of the security service of their Chamber of Commerce, a strong warrior of the second category. Seeing a silhouette that looked like him, Andre asks the client to leave the room. He is afraid that he will not be able to guarantee the safety of the gentleman. The young man assures the man not to worry, because in this world no one can kill him. Then the captain, full of determination, goes into battle with the silhouette. The girls are scared of what's going on. Destruction reigns around, fights. The silhouette strikes at Andre and cuts his sword. When the captain realized that there was no point in fighting anymore, he asked the shadow to stop. The silhouette suddenly turns around and leaves the captain alone. The shadow approaches the slaves who are sitting on the floor and trembling with fear. He raises his sword and cuts the chains on the hands and feet of the girls. When the worker and the captain are frozen in misunderstanding, Tao approaches Andre and explains that this dark silhouette did not intend to kill him, but only wanted to save those slaves. When the rule came into effect, chaos began to reign everywhere. One of the merchants stands on the balcony of his shop and tells the workers not to give up and fight to the last. Noticing that his goods are running away, he shouts for them to be returned. After these words, a dark silhouette appears behind the man's back. The shadow strikes, and the man falls down, breaking the wooden railing of the mezzanine with his body. He falls at the feet of the elf. Seeing the merchant, the girl hurries to escape from this room as soon as possible. A heavenly Tao appears near a man dreaming about his money. He looks up at the departing girl and wishes her a good return home. When the young man noticed the speed of the elf, a girl named Kingshin appeared behind him. She knelt down in front of her master. The girl is glad that she has finally found a young man. Kingshin and the gentleman went to the tea shop, which was located in the city. The young man brings a cup of tea to his mouth and before drinking it, blows on the tea in an attempt to cool it down. He reminds the girl of his request. The guy asked her not to follow him. Kingshin exclaims that she has sworn to follow her master everywhere. The subordinate asks the master to let her walk side by side with him. After receiving a negative answer, Kingshin falls to her knees and asks not to leave her. The girl asks what's wrong with her, and having asked this question, it says that she can become what her master wants her to be. Rising from the table, the young man says that he is not leaving her, but she has become too attached. He also adds that the girl does not know how to control herself at all. If someone starts bothering her, she will just smash everything around. When Kingshin rushes into the arms of the master, he tries to push her away, and says that if the girl stays with him, she will one day attack him in a dark night in the room. A ball appears near the young man and says that Kingshin will not do so. This is the most she is capable of. The young man decided to take pity on the girl and tells her that she can follow him, but the subordinate should behave calmly and not kneel. Her behavior attracts too much attention. Kingshin agrees with every word, and she thinks that since the master did not drive her away, then there is a separate place for the girl in his heart. Tao tells Shar that he wants to end slavery, but suddenly got his own slave. Shar replies that it would be more logical to compare her with a dog. The young man remembered that the previous Tao had 5 incarnations, and he asks if there is a similar one here. The ball assures the guy that not all incarnations of heaven are girls. Among the 5 incarnations of heaven, only Kingshin and Yukishin are girls, and Hun, Dunshin, and Huanshin are men. In the end, the balloon says that they treat the young man loyally. The guy decides to ask Kingshin about the rebels, how she treats them. The girl's expression becomes serious, and she says that everyone who opposes the sky is greedy and rude people. Whether it's the first or second worlds, all they do is kill each other out of greed. Tao grins and says that at the beginning of the second cycle, the survivors of the first died before the forces of the 3 worlds were restored. And luring spiritual forces into your own little world is tantamount to killing chickens. That is why the master should destroy everyone, the young man adds. Kingshin says that the gods are dead, the demons are destroyed, the centuries are constantly replacing each other, and the sky is eternal. The girl also says that her master is the eternal ruler of the 3 worlds. But the young man denies her words, saying that despite the invincibility of the heavenly Tao, it is not yet certain that something more powerful than him cannot appear. After finishing the dialogue, Tao gets up from the table and says that it's time for them to go. Going outside, the young man opens the system window and the voice says that the implementation of the new rule is successful. Then the girl decides to ask the gentleman a question. It is obvious that the Tao can grant untold wealth to everyone and get rid of the oppression of a particular race, for which then the master needed to introduce this rule with silhouettes. The young man replies that the meaning of the existence of the heavenly Tao is to maintain a certain order and balance, or actions are aimed at eliminating the imbalance, and not at doing well for everyone. It is the duty of the Heavenly Tao to open new paths of development for humanity. The guy is capable of what others can do, but he has the courage to do what others are not capable of. This is the way of the Heavenly Tao. If there is white in the world, then there should be black, but the predominance of one thing is undesirable. Turning his head, the young man decides to show by example how important the right balance of good and bad is. In order for his subordinate not to do anything, he made her invisible. Not far from the young man there was a girl who was giving alms. While she was busy talking to a beggar, a man behind her was trying to pull a bag of money out of the girl's pocket. Heavenly Tao called out to the girl and told her to be careful while she was giving alms. The girl's gaze is filled with rage, and she turns to the thief. After making sure that a man is really standing behind her, she kicks him in the stomach and the thief flies away. Tao praises the girl's blow, and she in turn thanks him. They introduce themselves to each other. This girl is a warrior and her name is AI. The young man, in turn, says that he is a Heavenly Tao and they shake hands. Thanking Heavenly Tao again, AI says that she needs to finish something, so she turns around and is about to leave. But the young man stops her. He asks the AI warrior to fulfill his request, because the girl is an adventurer. Tao throws a bag of money into the girl's hands and tells her that he is going to go to the Western continent. He will be bored on the road, so the young man needs company. Seeing such a generous reward, AI agrees without a doubt. Tao still hasn't made Kingshin visible, so the girl asks if she can talk to her master. The young man tells her to just obey. When the time comes, he will let her out himself. The team stops in the City of Freedom. When the preparation was completed, AI waves his hands to Tao and says that the crew is ready. She apologizes to the gentleman for taking a lot of time to prepare and says that they should not attract much attention, so this crew is the best fit. After the warrior finished explaining, she decided to introduce the young man to her friends with whom she travels. A middle-level Taoist, Ahai, the young man puts his fist to his open hand and introduces himself by name. Near the young man is a nun at an early stage, Mary. After completing the acquaintance, the team sets off. The nun is sitting opposite the Heavenly Tao and the young man asks Mary if she is from the Holy Sea of Light. Ahai, who is driving the cart, tells Heavenly Tao that few people are spending money for the sake of simple communication now, and asks why the master does not have a guard. The young man replies that the guards will not be stronger than him. Warrior AI adds that Lord Heavenly Tao is very strong, so he does not need protection. Ahai grins and says that he barely feels the aura of the master. Because of this it is difficult to say whether he is here for sure. Hearing these words, the master's body begins to emit a purple glow. It pours out of the crew and descends into the underworld. The aura reaches the girl who was sitting on her knees, and her hands were tied with chains to a tree. As soon as the violet glow appeared in the underworld, the girl immediately felt the aura of her master. The AI warrior suddenly looks out of the carriage window and sees a path that was strewn with people. Someone was lying in tents, someone was sitting on the ground. Everyone who was in the cart is wondering who these people are. Heavenly Tao replies that they must be slaves from Freedom City who were saved thanks to the dark silhouettes. Mary asks why they ran away from the city, because it's dangerous. AI replies that this happened because the silhouettes banned the slave trade, so these people were left without a roof over their heads. AI says that it is difficult for him to imagine the number of people who died at the hands of dark silhouettes. Mary replies, despite the fact that the followers of the Holy See are against the slave trade, the methods of dark silhouettes are very radical. But AI does not agree with Mary's opinion. She believes that silhouettes are doing the right thing. After listening to different opinions, Heavenly Tao decides to ask if the dark silhouettes are right. The girls are in no hurry to answer, and Ahai, on the contrary, decides to express his point of view. He says that the silhouettes are doing the right thing. Compared to the suffering of the slaves, the behavior of the silhouettes does not seem to be something bad. Although the slaves lost the castle, they gained freedom and a future. The AI warrior jumps out and exclaims that now the slaves have the right to do what they want. Mary notices that sold slaves have a hard time. The girl puts her hands in a lock and asks the God of Light to save their souls. Seeing the girl praying, Heavenly Tao asks what is the meaning of these prayers. The nun does not understand what the young man is talking about. He, in turn, says that the God of Light will not be able to save so many people. The girl extremely disagrees with the words of the guy, so she expresses her indignation that the God of Light is a merciful goddess who sooner or later will help everyone in need. The young man again objects and says that she will not help anyone. AI gets up to try to prevent a conflict. She tells Mary that the Heavenly Tao was joking, and she tells the young man that the clergy are very devoted to their faith, so it's better not to argue. Tao turns his head to the still invisible Kingshin and the thought flashes through his mind that the God of Light really can't help anyone. Ahai laughs to soften the situation and says that the gentleman went a little too far with the statements. Then the young man asks if they really believe that God will help everyone. Ahai laughs again and says that instead of believing in such a thing, it's better to learn a few spells in order to protect yourself. Ai also enters into the conversation and says that it is best to pray for others, not for yourself. They don't think about relying on the gods when they ensure their own safety. They have to fight for peace on their own. The Heavenly Tao says that the thoughts of people from the Eastern continent deserve respect. Mary, in turn, asks to explain the fact that people on the Eastern continent are still sacrificed for the sake of rain. Hearing about this, the young man tells Ahai that since he is a Taoist, isn't there a spell that can cause rain? Ahai smiles in response and says that a person of the 5th rank cannot cause rain, let alone a downpour. Then the Heavenly Tao says that a Taoist of the 3rd rank can create ice talismans, launch them to the clouds, moisten the clouds, and thereby accelerate the pouring of rains. Ahai doesn't understand what the young man is talking about, and the girls start laughing. Ai, through laughter, says that rain can't go if the clouds are frozen. Kingshin becomes enraged and is about to enter into an argument with the girls, but Heavenly Tao blocks her way, putting his hand in front of her chest. He asks the girl to calm down, because it's useless to talk to people who don't even know the basics of physics. Noticing that this time Kingshin calmed down too quickly, the young man turns to the girl. He notices where his hand is and makes a decision. The guy logs into the system and selects the Protect from Kingshin item. When the sun has set over the horizon, the company decides to stop for the night. Mary fed the horses, and Ai brought firewood for the fire. Ahai utters a spell and fire flies out of his hands, which the young man directs to dry branches. After making a fire, Ahai says that it is dangerous to walk at night, so the 3 of them will take turns on duty so that the gentleman can sleep peacefully. The young man agrees and opens the system to familiarize himself with the terrain. There are 3 combat rank monsters nearby. Besides, there are several low-level ones, so it won't be so difficult to destroy the team. When Heavenly Tao finishes, Kingshin comes up to him and says that there is a group of monsters in the southwest of the west. The girl asks what to do with them. The young man spreads out a sleeping bag, and covering himself with a blanket, says that nothing needs to be done. Tao tells the girl to just stand by while he sleeps. The girl wishes the gentleman good night, and in response, a wooden sign flies into her face, on which it says no night approaches. In the middle of the night, a conversation took place between Ai and Ahai, who woke up the Heavenly Tao. The couple was standing on the cliff of the mountain and the girl announced her pregnancy. After this joyful news, the young man embraced Ai. But before he has time to rejoice, the guy starts shouting to the others to wake up. Ahai was scared of something, so Ai turned around to find out what had happened. At the bottom she saw a bright green light. Skeletons of people and animals began to appear from there. It was an undead squad. The Heavenly Tao wakes up and asks the ball about the main functions of the world, for example, such as the 6 reincarnations. The balloon responds that these functions exist, but there was a breakdown. The young man begins to get angry and takes the words of the ball for a joke, because there must be an explanation for the fact that reincarnation was violated. Shar explains that at the beginning of the first great cycle, the predecessor of the Heavenly Tao created reincarnation in order to somehow balance yin and yang, using part of his powers. At the end of the first great cycle, reincarnation was in the hands of demons. Then Tao had a question why it was impossible to embody all this normally. The balloon continues the story that in fact, in the beginning everything worked out, and the first world wall was put up to balance everything. But the influx of mixed energy has led to incalculable casualties. The young man partly understands the former Heavenly Tao. It is true that the problem cannot be solved by force, but it is possible to deal with the enemy. A rider on a horse approaches the team. His eyes were glowing green, and there were numerous cracks on his skull. The rider called people. Ai was scared that he was talking. A nun approaches the Heavenly Tao and says that there is a possibility that they will die today. After all, they are unlikely to withstand necromancers and death knights of the 3rd rank, as well as countless undead soldiers. Ahai says that they will all die if Lord Heavenly Tao is not stronger than them all. Marie, desperate, falling to the ground and folding her hands in a lock, begins to pray. Everyone was very scared, so the Heavenly Tao approaches the undead and asks why they came here. Without receiving an answer, a bright blue glow began to surround the young man, which meant that the Heavenly Tao was ready to fight the undead. Surrounded by blue light, the Heavenly Tao summons the undead to battle. Countless skeletons are running to attack. Their bodies are pierced by the force and they crumble. Creatures devoid of any intelligence will always move blindly because of their instincts. Suddenly, Kingshin flies up to the young man to deal with the monsters, but the girl does not have time to attack. The rider swings his sword and several skeletons crumble into small pieces. In an intimidating voice, he says that the young man is so strong that he cannot attack. Heavenly Tao grins and starts clapping his hands. He says that the rider acted wisely, because he is different from other representatives of his species. After discovering a danger that could easily destroy his ethnic group, he killed all his subordinates without hesitation. Char noticed that this was not murder, since they had already parted with their lives for a very long time. The young man waved off, saying that it was necessary to restore reincarnation as soon as possible. Noticing the command of the Heavenly Tao, the rider decides to kill the weak. After receiving the order, the skeletons begin attacking Mary, Ahaya and Ai. The young man, using a spell, tries to fight them with fire, and the girl strikes at the skeletons. Seeing this, Heavenly Tao decided that he had hired them to chat with him. Before the team completes their task, no one can harm them. The young man hits the ground with his foot, and a blue light passes through it, which causes numerous cracks and fractures in the ground. Skeletons begin to fall into the pit, and with them the main rider. When it's over and the undead have disappeared, a ball appears and reminds Tao of his own words about not threatening others. The young man grins and says that the problem cannot be solved by force, but it is possible to deal with the enemy. Tao and Char finish their dialogue, and the young man turns to someone, telling him not to hide, because he was behind what was happening. A necromancer girl appears from under a pile of bones. She bows and apologizes for ruining the team's journey. The young man approaches the girl and tells her that he is not such a cruel person. Besides, no one owns this land, so anyone can be here. The necromancer thanks Tao for understanding, and tells the surviving skeletons to bow. The undead kneel down, and the team walks along the line of skeletons. Ahai says that he did not expect that one day the undead of the third rank would bow to him like this. It seems to Ahai that everything that is happening is a dream. The nun doesn't agree with Tao's choice, so she stops and shouts at him that he can't just leave like that. Mary believes that if you let the undead go, they will kill a lot of people. The young man turns to the girl and asks what actions she expects from him. Mary's voice breaks into a scream. She tells Tao that since he is strong, he should have killed all the undead. In her opinion, the master should eliminate their very existence. In this case, justice will be restored, and Lord Heavenly Tao will become a hero and savior. Tao pushes the girl away from him and asks her why the weak should not exist. He does not believe that all the words that Mary has just uttered are the teachings of the God of Light. The girl doesn't understand what the guy is talking about. Tao continues, and says that from the point of view of the God of Light, the soul is just an insignificant being. The fact that they are different does not make them bad at all. Everyone should be equal, regardless of faith and race. At the end of his speech, Tao asks Mary if she starts killing everyone who is weaker, will it be considered the right way, worthy of a nun? The girl lowers her head and tears roll down her face. Ai decides to ask Tao if he is familiar with the first generation of the God of Light. The young man turns to the girl and replies that he cannot know her. The first generation God of Light did not even have the proper qualifications, which is why Tao is not familiar with her. Forgetting about the conversation about the God of Light, Ai bows to Tao and hands him a bag of money. The girl thanks the young man for saving her, but the Heavenly Tao refuses money. He was happy to chat with them. Besides, the guy now had a new task. Tao opens the system and a new one called Religious Belief appears on the table where the tasks are written. Before his departure, Tao reminds that God exists. But, in his opinion, God is a stronger being, very similar to man. If the team works hard, they will be able to become one themselves. After finishing his speech, Tao disappears. Kingshin and Tao find themselves in the sky, under the clouds. The girl asks the gentleman why he wants to help these mortals. The guy replies to his subordinate that if he wants to restore the rule of heaven, mortals are the most important part to this. Tao also adds that all this is focused on people. The girl salutes, thereby agreeing with her master. When the young man finishes his monologue, Kingshin asks his master where they will go next. The blue light reappears around them, and Tao replies that they are on their way to the underworld. The underworld is in chaos. The clouds have turned purple, lightning flashes in the sky, and half-dead people walk on the ground. The emotions with which they died were frozen on their faces. The mouths of these people are open, and not even a drop of life is visible in their eyes. Tao looks at everything that is happening with obvious disgust, and the ball tells the young man that this is the underworld, one of the three worlds. He is responsible for death and reincarnation. Kingshin says that such views are not worthy of her master's eyes, so she is going to deal with everything. But Tao stops the girl, since the undead are low-ranking creatures devoid of reason, so you should not waste your strength on them. Then the system asks why Tao is not biased against the undead. The young man replies that the existence of the undead corresponds to the rules of heaven, so they do not differ in any way from other races. At the moment, reincarnation is broken, so they remain dead without reason. A black ball in purple flame appears in front of Kingshan and Dao. The subordinate and the young man are covered with interference, and the girl asks what they will do next. Tao brings his hand to the ball, determined to change everything. The system asks the guy to stop, and says that despite the fact that Tao is able to recreate reincarnation, it will take a lot of effort, and the young man will become vulnerable. The system explains that most likely, the Dao will be able to withstand the first blow, but the second one will already cause injuries. The young man does not consider this a vulnerability. He thinks that the system has other evaluation parameters. The system continues its explanation. The main reason is that the Tao cannot be influenced during the construction of reincarnation, otherwise nothing will work. Tao has a plan. He flies up to Kingshan and grabs her by the waist. The young man says that she can help him, and the girl's body begins to emit green light in the form of smoke. Tao asks his subordinate to lend him her power to reconstruct reincarnation together. Fascinated by this action, the girl does not understand what her master is talking about, so she agrees. A girl and a young man find themselves in a green ball. A bony hand appears from a pile of skeletons. It can't find its own, but when it finds it in a bunch of other heads, it puts it on itself. The skeleton feels strange. She thinks it's the end of an era or rebirth. This skeleton is a divine, level warrior named Gui Dai. Gui Dai looks up at the source of the bright light and sees the great reincarnation. She can't believe that Heavenly Dao is actually doing this. In the beginning, Gui Dai and Yuan Xuan from the ancient Yuanshan family fought for control of reincarnation. The latter received half of the power, but the reincarnation process was disrupted. Seeing the young man, Gui Dai thinks about how the Heavenly Dao changed his appearance, because before he changed his appearance to male, then to female. But it doesn't matter to the skeleton. If he takes the initiative, then Gui Dai will be only too happy. Not far from himself, Gui Dai begins to hear the voices of the undead. Someone was talking about his child. Someone remembered himself as a guard. The skeleton understands that all these people have regained their consciousness and memory. She is amazed by the power of the Heavenly Tao. The skeleton is afraid that she will suffer if she takes at least one extra step. But when those people are resurrected, the probability of success will be much higher. Moreover, reincarnation has undergone changes. Not only the dead remain in a winning position. Gui Dai falls to the ground and decides to forget himself, because this time the Lord will sort everything out. After a while, the dead begin to turn into their former forms. Kingshan tells the master that several creatures have appeared not far from them. Tao hugs the girl closer to him and asks not to worry about her, because he will take care of her safety. The young man snaps his fingers and a dark silhouette of the Heavenly Dao appears outside the ball. He can handle the job of a watchman. Kingshan asks the master why the young man won't let her go if he wants to stop those creatures. Tao replies to the girl that he is pursuing his goals, and the thought flashes through his head that if he allows Kingshan to fight, the world will be destroyed before the guy restores reincarnation. A dark silhouette hovers in the air. Opposite him are various creatures. The silhouette offers two options for the outcome of events. The first is to go back, and in the second the creatures can continue the offensive. But then the silhouette will kill everyone. The creatures fall silent for a second, but then one of them says that everything said is a bluff, and he is interested in seeing the power of this silhouette. While the Dao doppelganger is successfully coping in battle, a skeleton in a dark robe appears behind him, and there is a purple ball near his hands. This skeleton is Ao's. Its strength is an early rank of the Order of Heaven. During the second great cycle, in order to protect his master, he tried to restore his consciousness after death, relying on powerful magical power. The Epa strikes a dark silhouette. The silhouette, feeling the attack of gravity, says that magic of this kind cannot stop him. Suddenly, a creature in the form of a rat, the size of a man, appears. He says that this force is enough to detain the double. The name of this rat is Slot. Its strength is the middle rank of the Order of Heaven. He is the first known Rat Clan assassin with super fast speed and unsurpassed killing skills. He was killed while trying to attack the elf god. After seeing the ball containing Kingshan and Dao, Slot decided that this mission was for him. Therefore, he leaves the silhouette and goes to the ball. Kingshan is scared of a rat attack, so he presses closer to Tao. He puts his arm around her and tells her not to look. A Dao double flies up to the Slot from behind. The silhouette grabs the rat by the head and sends the Slot to the ground with a blue beam. The rat is pinned down by the silhouette's attack and it dies. The Dao doppelganger folds his arms on his chest and says that there is no need to go far with games. The rest of the creatures begin to rebel because the dark silhouette is one, and there are many of them. Therefore, everyone decides to attack the double in order to show their power. They are confident that they will be able to defeat the doppelganger because, in their opinion, they are superior to him in strength. The silhouette folds his arms on his chest and decides to show his absolute strength because these creatures have no idea what awaits them. The blue laser presses the creatures to the ground, and the silhouette tells everyone to kneel. All creatures are paralyzed, and they cannot move. Only 2 girls, one of whom was a mermaid, remain untouched. They are surprised by this terrifying power. In just a few words he managed to suppress so many creatures. Ominous laughter is heard behind the girls. It was the skeleton knight Wanhai. He noticed that such interesting people had not visited the underworld for a long time, so Vanhai would like to try this power on himself. The creatures, seeing Vanhai, begin to whisper, and one of them tells that in the first cycle he was the most powerful knight. Even after his death, Wanhai did not exhaust his strength, and he is currently one of the most powerful beings in the world. Wanhai says that all the treasures of heaven should belong to him, and those who stand in his way should die. The skeleton aims its cannon at the dark silhouette. He releases attacks, but misses. Then the knight grins and decides to make a stronger attack. Red rays begin to surround the horse and Vanhai's body. His attacks fly into other creatures. Some barely manage to stay in place. The power of Wanhai is so powerful that it has spread throughout the cemetery. The whirlwind of their Wanhai attacks is spreading everywhere. Chaos is happening in the afterlife, but the skeleton is not going to retreat so easily. The knight climbs onto his horse, and a purple shield appears in front of him, which completely envelops him and the horse. A funnel of his strength forms under the horse and Vanhai rushes at full speed to strike, but he fails to do so. In front of him, the rider sees a fist of a dark silhouette. The fist attacks Wanhai and hits him in the face. Then there is another flash, but already blue, which erases the knight from the face of the earth. Wanhai flies off his horse. His body crumbles into ashes. The skeleton of his horse crumbles into small pieces on different parts of the earth. The creatures who watch the battle of the 2 strongest creatures freeze in a daze. They don't understand how such power can be in a person. The Dao doppelganger turns around and sees 3 beings. The founder of the necromancer sect is Daisy. The ancestor of the corpse sect from the 2nd cycle is Gulao, middle rank. And the totem of the eastern land is a Hau with an average rank. She was the only one of the 3 of them who was injured. The silhouette flies closer to the creatures and asks if they want to fight him. Frightened, they reply that they only wanted to know the name of His Excellency and the purpose of his visit. The doppelganger answers so that they don't ask unnecessary questions, but just wait. The ball in which Kingshan and Tao were located begins to emit light, which turns a dark and gloomy place into a bright world. The sky no longer has a dirty purple hue. It has become clear and has acquired a warm orange color. Daisy, Gulao and Hova are watching what is happening. Hova concludes that he does not rule the law. He is the law. Daisy replies that if he managed to restore reincarnation, then what else is he capable of? Hearing about reincarnation, the 2 turn to the necromancer and are surprised by this. The silhouette again says not to guess, but just wait and soon they will find out everything. Skeletal bodies begin to become covered with skin and acquire a human appearance. When Tao announces to Kingshan that they have finished, the young man looks at the new world and says that all this is for the sake of the normal functioning of the borders. Gui Dai is completely naked sitting on a mountain of skulls. The girl, laughing maliciously, examines her body and talks about the heavenly Tao, which could easily return souls to all people. A grin appears on Gui Dai's face, and the girl talks about how much she would like to thank Mr. Heavenly Tao. The demon lady's body has been completely restored. Heavenly Tao, Daisy, Gulao and Hao watch the reborn people. Resurrected people examine their bodies, laugh and rejoice that blood is flowing through their veins again. Daisy notices that souls are improving, and Gulao says that no one can make up for broken souls. No one but the Heavenly Tao. The creatures turn around and notice the young man and Kingshan behind them. Hova asked disdainfully if he was a Heavenly Tao. Hearing such a tone, Kingshan becomes enraged, because no one dares to treat the master like that. The young man stops his subordinate and replies that he really is a Heavenly Tao. Hova's body shivers, and she remembers the consequences after the 2nd great cycle. The girl does not want to experience this again. Tao is approaching Hove and says that many have escaped the catastrophe. The guy asks the girl what happened then. Hova replies that it is a secret world. The young man does not understand what she is talking about. The girl explains that if there are enough resources in the secret world, then the disaster can be survived. Then Tao is perplexed, because these three have the power to resist the heavenly Tao. Daisy replies that despite the fact that the underworld is quite sparse, there are more than 100 heavenly forces in it. They work together to resist the heavens, but in the end only a dozen supporters survived. Hova dares, and asks why the heavenly Tao needed to cause this disaster. The young man replies that their world is already the pinnacle of existence one way or another. It is inevitable that they will also be affected by changes in the law. But not everyone has the law. Only a limited number of people, creatures without them, see what others have, so they start fighting. The heavenly Tao evenly distributes opportunities between people, but gradually the balance of power has been disrupted. For example, the reincarnation of this world. All because of the fact that the head of the Huanshan clan, Yuan Xuan, and the demon lady began to fight with each other. In the end, reincarnation was broken. Since then, reincarnation has lost its power, which led to similar consequences. Thus, the heavenly Tao wants to save the lives of more people. Otherwise, this world will come to an end. After listening to the speech of the heavenly Tao, Daisy says that in the past they were obsessed only with cultivation, so they did not pay attention to others. Gulao confirms the girl's words, calling it a kind of retribution. The heavenly Tao adds that regardless of the person, he, in any case, will make a mistake one day, so it is very important to correct it in time. The creatures do not understand what the young man means by the word fix. Therefore, Tao gives a chance to improve, and offers to join him. The creatures are surprised by this suggestion, and Kingshan says that they are not strong enough and are not worthy of the attention of the master. But Tao objects, saying that any forces are necessary to maintain order. Despite the fact that they are powerless against the heavenly Tao, they are among the most powerful in their world. With the same success, a young man can say that reincarnation is not perfect. Reincarnation has a mechanism of natural absorption of souls, so weak souls are more susceptible to absorption. But for beings superior to gods and kings, the power of reincarnation is not that important. Therefore, the heavenly Tao points to the three beings and says that their powers are more important than ever. When danger arises, they must transfer the opponent's soul to the realm of reincarnation. The young man even came up with a name for this profession, Messengers of the Devil, and the organization will be called the Afterlife. After seeing Kingshan's angry aura, everyone except Hova agrees. The girl says she will join, but with one condition. Hearing this, Kingshan becomes enraged, because, in her opinion, some totem of the Eastern land has no right to set conditions. Heavenly Tao stops the subordinate again, saying that only mutual benefit can make cooperation truly worthwhile. The young man understands what condition the girl is talking about. He clarifies about the wound, and Hova gives a positive answer. The girl turns her back to the heavenly Tao, lifts her hair so that the young man can see the wound better. She is trying to find a position in which it will be more convenient to see her wound. There are 3 stripes on the girl's back from the claws of a demonic wolf. They bleed and look terrifying on the back of an elegant girl. But to heal this wound, the sap of the tree of life from the forest of elves is needed. Tao agrees to Hova's condition, and the girl thanks him for it. When Heavenly Tao says that almost everyone has joined his organization, but they do not have a manager, Kingshan has a suggestion. The subordinate mentions Yu Mingshan, saying that this girl is the best fit. The guy says her name again and finds the girl in the system. The girl without clothes with long hair appears on the sign, and a description and characteristics of the girl were also written. She was lying in the fetal position, as if she was under years of ice. Yu Mingshan has a reverse heaven rank. First she defied the heavens, and then she accepted defeat from the sword of the demonic Lord of Ice. Heavenly Tao asks the ball if he can resurrect this girl. Shar replies that the young man's powers are able to bring Yu Mingshan back to life. Hearing about this, the young man and Kingshan leave in order to resurrect Yu Mingshan. While they are on their way, Kingshan has a question. It is obvious that the Heavenly Tao himself can heal Hao's wound. Then why should they go to the Forest of Elves? The young man replies that this is the same as completing a mission from a non-player character. When Heavenly Tao and Kingshan reach their destination, they see a huge tree in front of them. The ground around it is strewn with crystals, and the tree itself is surrounded by chains. Purple smoke had accumulated around the tree, and seals were printed on the tree itself, which meant that the tree was enchanted. They come closer and see a girl sitting on her knees. Her body was limp, and her hands were tied with chains to the branches of a tree. Yu Mingshan was motionless and not breathing. The young man comes closer to Yu Mingshan and takes the girl by the chin. Tao examines her face and makes sure that the girl is dead. He concludes that despite the fact that she was killed and sealed, her aura is just like that of a living person. A ball appears near the guy and says that among the 5 incarnations of heaven, the power of Kingshan is the weakest. The young man is glad that the girl did not hear what the system just said. The heavenly Tao opens the system and a message appears in front of him, which says that the resurrection of the incarnations of heaven takes away a large amount of power from the heavenly Tao and cannot be returned to the master again. The young man understands that in the event of her death, his power will not return to him, so you need to be careful. Then another message appears. The system asks for another confirmation whether the heavenly Tao really wants to resurrect Yu Mingxian. The guy penetrates his fingers into his forehead and pulls out a small ball with 1% strength. As soon as the power is in the hand of its owner, the strongest wind is understood, because of which it is difficult for people to stand on their feet. This one reaches Daisy, Golao and Hao. After seeing this flow of power, they don't understand why Lord Heavenly Tao would release so much power. Gui Dai also feels the power of the Heavenly Tao, and she thinks that he guessed that the girl is alive. As soon as the young man puts the ball in his fist, everything calms down around him. He didn't expect that the powers of the Heavenly Tao were so terrifying. Amazing. The guy kneels in front of Yu Mingxian and brings a blue ball to her chest. He inserts it with his fingers into the girl's heart and bright blue rays begin to appear from her chest. When the girl comes to life, she immediately rushes into the arms of her master. But the idol is interrupted by Qingshan, who came to separate them. Yu Mingxian immediately apologizes, explaining his action by saying that it was done on emotion. Yu Mingxian kneels before the Heavenly Tao, thanks him, and promises not to let the master down again. The young man answers her that the girl was resurrected in order for Tao to give her one task. Starting today, Yu Mingxian will be the governing organization of the afterlife. Her task is to build the afterlife and ensure the safety of reincarnation. The girl bows before the Heavenly Tao and replies that this assignment will be everything for her. And the young man understands that now it will be even harder for him, because another girl has appeared, and one Qingshan was enough for him. Yu Mingxian decides to ask if the Lord will stay in the underworld. Qingshan gets into the conversation, and jealously clinging to the young man, says that the Heavenly Tao has other things to do, so she will stay here alone. Tao runs his hand over Yu Mingxian's head, and tells her that she is one of the incarnations of heaven, so she should behave more confidently. The young man also adds that he has already completed reincarnation, so the girl only needs to become the mistress of the afterlife. Upon hearing his master's request, Yu Mingxian begins broadcasting to the entire underworld. The girl appears to be one of the incarnations of heaven. From now on, she will rule the afterlife, as well as assist the Heavenly Tao in governing the entire earth. Now all people must work for the benefit of the Heavenly Tao, and the above-placed beings will be responsible for the construction work. Powerful beings will become messengers of the devil, will go for souls to lead them to reincarnation. If anyone dares to disobey, they will immediately become an enemy of the Heavenly Tao. After hearing this news, Gui Dai becomes enraged. When Heavenly Tao and Qingshan descend from the mountain where Yu Mingxian was imprisoned, the young man notes the girl's abilities. The ball reminds that she used to be the mistress of the clan. Tao understands that there should be no problems if the afterlife is left to her. Then Qingshan asks where they are going next, and the young man talks about the forest of elves. The slave trade continues in the elven forest. Several carts are moving along the edge of the forest, and riders on horseback are riding at a distance from them. One of the hunters who drove the cart tells his colleague that the current elves are of the highest quality. The second adds that if they manage to sell slaves, they will be able to enrich themselves decently. The man sitting on the dragon asks those men to be silent, because even before leaving the forest, one should not lose vigilance. This man is the commander of a group of abductors from the Earth Dragon. He is a knight of the 3rd rank, and his name is Sabai. While the other hunters are talking, Sabai notices a silhouette in the distance. One of the men clearly did not like it, because no one dares to block their way. A dark silhouette points to the cart in which the elf was sitting, and Sabai decides that this person wants to get their prey. Seeing a spear in the hands of an unknown person, hunters burst out laughing, because no one uses this weapon in foot combat. The silhouette kneels down and raises the spear up. The area around him begins to glow with blue light, and a huge dragon of the 5th rank appears under the man. Elves see a dark silhouette on a dragon, and they are sincerely glad that they will finally be rescued. One of the girls says that the Lord of the Elves heard their prayers and sent them a savior. But the elf, who had no traces of happiness on her face, understands that if this is really the Lord of the Elves, then an elven angel should have appeared, but the silhouette of that person was dark. Sabai decided to make concessions, so he tells the dark silhouette that he can take 2 slaves if he needs them. But the silhouette does not agree with this condition, so with a gesture he shows that he needs all the elves. Sabai becomes enraged. He remembers how much effort and time his team spent to catch these elves. Therefore, having decided that since the Sabai dragon was not afraid of the knight of the 5th rank, then all this is a fake, and the man gives the order to kill the knight. The hunters go into battle, but all to no avail. The dragon releases a blue flame from its mouth, which immediately kills all the hunters. Seeing that all the comrades have been exterminated, Sabai begs the silhouette not to approach. A dark silhouette swings a spear, and the whole wagon crumbles into splinters. 3 girls are on the loose. The silhouette approaches the elves and one of them thanks the knight for saving her. While the silhouette has its back to him, Sabai decides to attack. But the man does not have time. The knight impales Sabai's body on a spear. Seeing that the leader is dead, the remaining hunters decide to escape. But the 3rd squad of the Guardian Legion comes out of the forest, and they stop the hunters. One of the keepers notices a dark silhouette and tells the Guardian girl that this man saved their comrades. He managed to defeat all the kidnappers. When one of the keepers stops the hunter and says that he is going to sell them to the nobles and earn money, the dark silhouette takes the form of this keeper. The silhouette shoots an arrow at the keeper's head, and he dies. Seeing this, one of the keepers asks everyone to prepare for battle because the keeper was killed. But one of the elves stands up to protect the silhouette. She covers him with her body and asks him to stop. The girl says that he didn't do anything wrong, he just brings justice to the world. The appearance of the deceased guardian frees the rest of the elves, freeing their hands from the ropes already released. The elf tells the keeper that this silhouette has a peculiarity. It attacks only those who intend to sell a person. This is true for both kidnappers and keepers. That is why, until he feels the intention of selling, he will not attack. Having figured out what the matter is, the keeper tells the others not to take anyone away. The elf standing next to the guardian notices how the dark silhouette begins to evaporate. Finally, the girl thanks the man again for saving her. Heavenly Dao and Kingshin were watching everything from above. They hung in the sky and watched as the early adopted law came into force. The devil's messengers appear behind them. They descend to the ground and, putting metal collars on the souls of hunters, send them to the afterlife. One of the elves noticed someone's presence, but she was interrupted by the keeper in order to return to their hometown, Kale. Tao watched the hunters' souls fly away, and he rejoices that the transition to the afterlife is working. Kingshin looks admiringly at his master, and says that it's all thanks to him. The young man grins and asks not to change the subject and not to forget the purpose of their visit. Their next destination is the capital of the elves, the city of life, Kale. There is a small group on the street, consisting of their rescued elves and keepers. One of the keepers says that from now on all the rescued will be responsible for the cleanliness of the city. Elves are given brooms, and they get to work. The girl who stood up for the protection of the dark silhouette stopped at the fence and looked at the tree. She is glad that she was finally able to return home. Kingshin and Heavenly Dao get out of the carriage. The young man pulls the girl by the ear, saying that in this way they will be able to blend in with the crowd. A man in a suit walked behind Dao, followed by a maid. They were talking about the amount of minerals that the lower races had dug up today. The young man turns his head in their direction, and sees a poor elf begging, and that man passes by him. Seeing this, the young man says that he is not against the aristocracy, but there is a big gap between the poor and the rich. He is depressed by this fact. A ball appears near the guy, who says that the Heavenly Dao can wipe out the entire aristocracy from the face of the earth. But the young man shrugs off these words. To achieve equality, the deprived must fight for themselves. The intervention of third parties will only make them the next criminals. The Heavenly Dao suddenly pays attention to the world tree. Since it is in good condition, the young man decides that it is connected with the elven god. Kingshin asks the master if he wants to find the elf god. The young man agrees, and the subordinate is already going to burn the tree so that God immediately appears. Tao stops the girl, saying that he does not want to fight. He just needs a conversation with God. Kingshin remembers about the second cycle, then this girl was a rebel, so there is nothing to talk about with her. While Tao is explaining to Kingshin that they need to get as many allies as possible, a noise is heard not far from them. The elven princess Yusha has entered the city. The girl was riding a dragon and was rushing at high speed, so she shouted to everyone who got in her way. The dragon is approaching the Heavenly Dao, and the young man uses the force through which the girl drove through it. The system tells Dao that it was Princess Yusha. She is in the middle of the third rank. The young man did not like how the children of the nobility behave, so he is going to fix it. An elf girl rushes past Dao. She flies up to her grandfather, who was just almost knocked down by Yusha. The elf manages to grab the man and pull him away from the dragon. Grandfather thanks the girl for saving him and wishes her that the elven goddess mother would protect the girl. Heavenly Tao approaches them and claps his hands. He says that the elf is very kind to feudal society. The irritated blonde turns to the voice and asks the young man who he is. Tao calmly replies that he is only a passerby. Heavenly Tao approaches Grandpa and asks him if the elf princess has always been so rude. The man replies that all the nobility behaves this way. The fate of the elves was predetermined from birth. The golden and moon elves are members of the royal family. Sea and forest elves are artisans. Gray and black elves, like Grandpa, can only be slaves. The elf does not agree with the man's statement. She adheres to the opinion that it is impossible to determine the fate of a person by his birth. Grandfather replies that gray elves live only 1,000 years, while golden elves live more than 5,000 years. The gods have already determined their fate. The elves can only obey. The young man says that elves are long-lived, and the ball replies that the price for this is low fertility. This is also one of the heavenly rules. The stronger the creature, the less likely it is to have offspring. Tao wonders if in this case he can have children. The system responds that it depends on whether the young man himself wants to have offspring or that someone else has. Kingshan, hearing about the fact that the gentleman wants to have a child, begins to ask him about how many children he wants. While Dao is trying to calm Kingshan down, Grandpa smiles and says that the young people are very energetic now. The man thanks the elf again for saving him and is about to leave. The girl is indignant, because it shouldn't be like this with elves. Dao comes up behind the girl and says that now the elves are not the same as they were when she ruled. The young man pronounces the name of the elf. This girl is Lulusha, the former mother goddess of the elves. Hearing this, bright green circles form around the girl. Streaks appear on her body and face, and her hair flew up from her sudden strength. The girl asks the young man who he is. The guy grins, because she doesn't even know the heavenly Tao. Lulusha does not believe in the words of the young man, because the heavenly Tao looks completely different. Tao decides to explain it differently. A huge blue shield appears around them, which blocks the powers of the former goddess. Tao approaches the girl, takes her chin and asks if she believes him now. Lulusha did not expect that Tao would be near her so quickly. The girl boldly throws the young man's hand away from her face and activates her power. She is about to strike, but is stopped by Qin Tian. The girl puts her foot in front of the elf in order to stop her. The subordinate did not like the way this rebel treated her master. Qin Tian decides to teach the girl a lesson, so he strikes and throws the elf a few meters away. But the goddess does not intend to give up, because her soul has just begun to recover and her strength barely reaches the top of the 5th rank. In the hands of the elf turns out to be a scepter, and she decides to use the movement in space. Tao notices that an elven mage of the 5th rank is a rarity. The young man does not allow the girl to escape. He activates a shield around the city, and when Lulusha was ready to fly away, she crashes into the barrier. Due to a strong blow, the girl falls to the ground, forming a depression in the ground under her. Qin Tian flies up to the elf and, sitting on top, wrings her hand. Tao, after observing this, decides to stop his subordinate. The girl is indignant, because Lulusha is the mother goddess of the elves and she is rebelling against heaven. After Qin Tian releases the goddess, Tao approaches the victim and asks if she now believes that the young man is a heavenly Tao. When the girl is thinking, the guy grabs her by the shoulder and says that he wants to ask a couple of questions. Realizing that in this situation Dongfeng Heishan could not escape, the girl decides to cooperate. Praising Luluthia for choosing to cooperate, Tao asks about the rebels' plan. The girl replies that despite being a member of the rebels of the 2nd cycle, the goddess does not know if they have a plan against heaven in the 3rd calendar. The girl also added that even if Dongfeng Heishan and the others were here, they would not have said about the plan. After the words of the goddess, Qin Tian is angry. It seems to her that Lulusha simply does not want to tell the truth. Having calmed the subordinate, Tao asks the second question. He asks about why Lulusha hates heaven. Grinning, the goddess replies that in the 1st cycle, she was a goddess born with a world tree. Together with the world tree, they protect the birth and growth of elves. But at the end of the 1st cycle, Lulusha saw the catastrophe with her own eyes. She barely survived. Her last breath was left, and the world tree turned back into a seed. The girl becomes enraged, because there is no point in this question. Then Tao replies that the destruction of the past heavenly Tao only led to the incitement of hatred. The ball enters the conversation. He says that in this past heavenly Tao failed. The young man decides to ask the last question. He asks Lulusha what is the most important thing in a girl's heart. The goddess thinks for a moment. But the girl quickly finds the answer. Lulusha says she just wants to live and protect her people forever. Dao grins and asks if she can do it. The girl is angry, and the young man says to face the truth. With the help of his power, Tao moves everyone to the Elven Forest mine. Lulusha does not understand where they ended up, and the young man replies that this place is called a good job for earning money. The goddess turns her gaze to how one of the elves hits a slave and tells them to hurry up with the delivery, otherwise they will be whipped. Seeing the mistreatment of people, the goddess becomes enraged. The girl does not understand how those elves dared to treat their own people like that. Tao says he can only stop the slave trade. If it's only slavery, then the black silhouette won't appear. Hearing about the dark silhouette, the goddess remembered about that incident on the edge of the forest. Then Lulusha decides to ask, if the goal is to save the slaves, then why not use force to pure slavery? Then the young man replies that slaves appear not only because of the slave trade. Criminals and prisoners are also slaves. The guy asks if the goddess wants to save them too. The girl becomes even more furious and replies that the thing she hates in the slave trade, murder, harassment, oppression, all this was decided by the leaders of their race. Tao approaches the girl from behind and, taking her by the face, says that the mother goddess of the elves should not throw the responsibility on him. The goddess is perplexed. Since Tao has the power to change everything, then why can't he save more people? The young man approaches the girl even closer and asks when the heavenly Tao did not want to change everything that she did. He also asks why the heavenly kingdom was devastated and why heaven is the world with the most resources. Lulusha breaks out of Dao's hands and says that they just wanted to live normally. The young man objects, because thanks to this desire they tried to take away the power of heaven. Tao notices that her people, and even the nobility, were just looking for a better life, oppressing their own kind. The mother goddess does not agree with the young man's statement. She says that this happened because the Tao wants to take away the power of all creatures to become stronger. Because of this the elves have to resist, otherwise the Tao will kill them. The young man replies that the power of the heavenly Tao comes from all beings. The death of all beings weakens the power of the heavenly Tao. The young man asks why he would, instead of destroying the strongest creatures, destroy everyone. The girl clutches her head, screaming that she does not know the answer to this question. The young man says that even though she doesn't know anything, she still wants to know. Then a blue light and a skeleton appear in the Tao's hand. Lulutia's eyes widen after what she sees. They find themselves in a dark cave. Tao shows the skeleton of a girl, as she was when she just woke up from the cycle. At that moment, Lulusha had completely drained the source of the aura. The purpose of the aura source is to restore the world tree and give it its own life force. This source of power has resurrected the continent. If the former goddess had not taken away the source of life, many people could have been born. The girl's voice breaks into a scream. She understands what she has done, but she just wants to live. If the Tao had not destroyed all living things, Luluthia would not have had to use the source of life to be reborn. The young man replies that if she had taken advantage of the opportunity given to all beings by heaven, then the heavenly Tao would not have had to destroy her. Some put pressure on others because of greed, and the girl faced the same problem with the heavenly Tao. Tao asks what Lulusha would say, looking into the eyes of fallen elves. But the girl does not have time to answer, as a voice is heard not far from them. A man reports an alarm as dark elf rebels have broken in. Before he can say anything else, a sword is thrust through his body. Chattel, the leader of the dark elf resistance, appears. He shouts to his fellow dark elves that he has come to free them. Chaos and murder begin to reign around. Blood splashes, gun sounds and screams can be seen everywhere. Tears begin to appear in Lulusha's eyes. The girl covered her mouth with her hand as soon as she saw the horror happening around her. Goddess start crying from injustice. It shouldn't be like this. Hearing the girl's mumbling, Heavenly Tao asks her what she is going to do if this all stops. If the root of the problem is not solved, then everything will happen behind her back. A terrifying grin appears on the girl's face. She blames the Heavenly Tao for everything that is happening. The girl rises from the floor and a magic scepter appears in her hand. The goddess, full of determination, decides to stop it, because she still has the strength. Kingshan starts to get angry again, because she doesn't learn from her mistakes. Tao detains the girl again, and tells Lulusha that in the second cycle, the elves have already divided into higher and lower classes. When a young man sees a misunderstanding on the girl's face, he decides to explain everything. In the second cycle, the Golden Elves, already close to Luluthia, were already nobles, and the Dark Elves were discounted. They never considered the Dark Elves to be the same race. They were considered scum among the elves. Therefore, the Heavenly Tao saw the suffering of all beings, and decided to destroy everything. And the goddess of the elves didn't even look after her people. The girl's courage evaporates, as does her scepter. Tao asks Lulusha to stop crying, and tells her that if there is a problem, then it needs to be solved. So did the heavenly Tao, and so the goddess must do. But Lulusha is too weak, she has no strength left. Tao comes closer to the girl and asks her where her courage went, what happened when she stood up against the heavens. The young man asks to show at least half of her strength, and the elves will change. The girl gathers her resolve and a plan appears in her head. The girl is going to the fortress of the resistance of the dark elves to find out their requirements. The young man praises the goddess, and to reward the girl, he decides to give her a lift. Tao snaps his fingers and a portal appears in front of them. Kingshan begins to get angry at the gentleman for helping Lulusha, because she is very rude. The young man replies that another friend is better than an enemy. The team reaches the fortress of the resistance of the dark elves. Lulusha approaches the entrance to the cave, and seeing a large spider with red eyes, the girl decides that old acquaintances are here. While the goddess is standing at the cave, Tao warns her that he has stopped hiding her presence, so she is now seen. The girl goes into the cave, and as soon as the spider noticed the presence of the stranger, the dark elves begin to attack. They shoot dozens of arrows, but the girl does not allow herself to be wounded. She puts up a shield in front of her, which protects her from attacks. The elves see this spell, and they understand that only magicians of the 5th rank can use it. One of the elves flies at the goddess with the words that the golden elves must die. The girl activates a force called Forest Protection. Tree branches begin to appear from the shield of the goddess, which grab the dark elves by the arms and legs, thereby immobilizing them. The Tao says that even at the 4th rank, the dark elves have considerable strength. This is a rarity among humans. An aura of purple color begins to differ in the cave, and a girl comes out from there. She tells everyone to stop because they are not her equal. Also, this girl adds that, after all, Lulusha was an elven goddess. This girl looked like a spider. She had no legs, and her body grew into the torso of a spider. Lulusha recognizes the girl. Her name is Grace. She is the goddess of the dark elves. Heavenly Tao is looking through the system for this girl. Her strength is the realm of the divine king Gu Feng, the 5th rank. She is an elven spider goddess, represents the shadow under the tree and the keeper of insects swarming on the tree. Tao doesn't understand why she is at the top of the 5th rank. He remembers that the current elven god is at the top of the heavenly rank. It seems to the young man that this is too big a difference. The system explains to the guy that there are 2 types of gods, natural gods and gods of faith. Nature gods are born by the will of heaven and are usually very strong. The gods of faith have to draw strength from the faith of others. If there are few believers, then the power will decrease and disappear. The goddess of the dark elves is the goddess of faith. Grace is glad that Lulusha is alive, because now she can kill her herself. Grace swings at the goddess with a scythe, but Lulusha manages to move away. The girl explains that she came here to save the dark elves. Grace's eyes fill with hatred, and she tells the girl that the dark elves suffered from injustice while she ruled, and things are only getting worse. Only by killing Luluthia and destroying her divine image can the dark elves be saved. After finishing her speech, Grace orders the dark elves to attack the enemies. Tao sees that elves are flying at him, so he stops time. The spider does not understand why all the dark elves froze. The young man replied that he had only stopped time. The girl does not believe in his words, because no one can do this. Ordinary people can't do that, but he's a heavenly Tao can. The girl does not believe her ears. She can't believe that this is the same heavenly Tao that destroyed the world in the 1st and 2nd cycles. Grace uses magic, and now instead of a spider torso, she has human legs. After making sure that this young man is really a heavenly Tao, the spider goddess bows to the Tao and asks for forgiveness for her rudeness. Tao can replies that he was just passing by, but the elves still need to question their god. The young man turns his gaze to Lulusha. The girl apologizes to Grace. She recognizes the fact that she is a bad goddess and an inept creator. The spider goddess replies that the fact that Lulusha blames herself will not save the dark elves. They need an opportunity to take revenge. Lulusha replies that she understands perfectly well what they are feeling right now. Their current state is similar to that of the goddess when she rebelled against the heavens. The goddess thought only of resisting oppression. She was ready to do anything for revenge. When Luluthia created the elves, she gave each race the appropriate characteristics and symbols. Golden elves, sun and light; moon elves, moon and night; forest, trees and animals; by sea, water and fish; gray, earth and life, and black, spiders and darkness. The goddess thought that everyone would be equal and would love each other. She hopes that the dark elves will be able to cope with hatred and live in peace. After these words, Grace becomes furious. The girl does not understand how she should explain to the dark elves that you should not be offended by the golden elves, despite the fact that they are constantly humiliated. Only by paying for the spilled blood, the elves will be able to live in peace. Grace grabs Lulusha by the shoulders and says that if she really wants to help the dark elves, then she should join the spider goddess to get rid of the golden elves together. After these words, Lulusha becomes sad. She replies that she can't do that. The dark and golden elves are her children. She doesn't want anyone to disappear. Grace becomes furious and shouts for the goddess to stop talking nonsense and drives the girl away so that she will continue to support the golden elves. Suddenly, Tauken gets involved in their dispute. Since the dark elves are constantly resisting, in that case, what do they want to achieve after they take revenge? Grace replies that she is doing this so that the golden elves will also feel despair. The spider goddess wants them to feel for themselves what it's like to stay in the dark underground. Then the heavenly Tao assumes that they do not hate the cruel rule of the golden elves, but they themselves want to rule the same way. But Grace was very offended by these words. The girl declares that she is not as selfish as the golden elves. All she wants is peace for the dark elves. Tauken smirks and says that if the dark elves are sure that they are different from the golden ones, then they should not do the same thing that the golden elves do. It's a moral issue, and if they also want to start oppressing, it means that they are beginning to become like the law of the jungle. Tao also adds that if Grace wants to fight the golden elves for power, then the girl should not complain that her people are suffering. But if the spider goddess is interested in the question of morality, then the young man advises not to go the girl the same way. The girl's body shivers, and she says that this is unfair. Really, for the fact that the golden elves cause them so much pain, they won't even get a proper answer. The heavenly Tao answers that you will have to pay for any actions. But the price of the dark elves is not to enslave the golden elves. Grace exhales noisily and agrees with Tao's words. She needs to create favorable conditions for life, for the sake of the dark elves. Lulusha rejoices at this verdict. The girl turns to the young man and asks for forgiveness for the fact that she interfered with him in their family showdown. Tao-san replies that meeting the elves gives him inspiration. The elves are her family, and all three worlds are his. The young man pursues the goal of finding ways to reconcile the three worlds. Meanwhile, Lulusha has already found a solution to the problem. The girl needs to talk to the current lord of the elves. If she doesn't speak, the goddess will use force. The young man grins and says that force will not solve the problem, but it will help to deal with the enemy. The girl replies that if the conversation fails, then the golden elves and the new lord of the elves are her enemies. Since the decision has already been made, Tauken decides to go with Lulusha and Grace to the elf palace. There is unrest in the Kale palace. A cup of tea flies to the floor. Princess Yusha put her foot on the dark elf's head and pressed the girl to the floor. The princess is unhappy that she was disobeyed. She told me to add less sugar because she's on a diet. Yusha's gaze is filled with rage. She turns to the maid who was standing behind her and asks if she made this tea. The girl is trembling with fear. She falls to her knees and begs the royal highness to spare her. Yusha is not interested in the maid's excuses and the girl kicks her in the face. Tauken and Lulusha are hanging in the air and watching what is happening through the window. The girl does not understand how the elven nobles can do this to their own clan. The heavenly Tao points to another window. A man leads two slaves. They are wearing metal collars. The door opens, and the man bows to Mr. Vladika, informing him that new servants have arrived. A man is sitting on a bed with a silk golden bed surrounded by slaves. Tao asks the goddess how she feels looking at everything that is happening. A scepter appears in the girl's hands, and she says that if these people are really elven nobles, in that case, negotiations are unnecessary. The goddess activates a yellow field under her and asks the sleeping tree of the world to answer her call. After this action, the earth begins to shake. No one understands what happened. The elves start to run away in a panic. Someone is praying to God to have mercy. The keepers are starting to run away from the edge of the forest because the tree people are out of control. Thanks to the call of the goddess, the green dragon of the elven forest, Iraq, woke up. He looks towards the tree of the world and a deafening roar is heard from the throat of the monster. Thanks to this cry, the animal's eyes turned red. Meanwhile, in the heavenly world, in the palace of the heavenly elf god, a young man is sitting. This is the god of the elves of the third cycle, Randall. He sensed the state of the world tree and wondered why it was angry. The man calls the guards. 3 girls appear in front of him, and Randall orders them to check the world tree. If it is hostile towards the guards, then they will need to get rid of it. Clouds are gathering in the sky. Grace, looking at the tree, beckons Chattel to her. The girl orders to prepare all the dark elves. The battle is about to begin. Meanwhile, there is a conflict in the palace. The angry current lord of the elves asks Lulusha and Tao Tsan who they are, and for what reason the tree of the world was angry. The girl replies that he doesn't need to know who she is. The goddess wants the elven nobles to pay for the oppression of their own race. The lord of the elves begins to laugh, and the girl does not understand what made him laugh so much. The man says that she will never understand one thing. Even with the help of the elves in the world tree, the golden elves will not be overthrown. Because the god of the golden elves is the current lord of the elves, one of the gods of the heavens of the west. Luluthia turns around, saying that in this case they have nothing to talk about. But the Lord will not leave it just like that. A terrifying grin appears on his face, and he asks the goddess if she is sure that she wants to leave. The Lord gestures at the enemies, and all the guards point their weapons at Tao Tsan and Lulusha. Heavenly Tao warned the girl that they are all above the 5th rank, so she should be more careful. The goddess grins in frustration, and says that she just wants harmony. The girl does not understand why the elves do not listen to her. The young man replies that it is not worth asking him about this, because he also asked this question earlier. The Lord asks the last words of Tao and Lulusha, receiving silence in response. The guards begin to attack. Tears accumulate in the girl's eyes, and she whispers asking not to blame her for her choice. At this moment, tree people appear behind the wall. They are besieging the whole city and the guards are preparing for defense. One of the tree people is about to strike a stone wall, but the blue shield prevents him from doing so. A green dragon appears in the distance. He releases a flame from his mouth, which punches a hole in the wall. This hole allowed the tree people to get into the city. The warriors, seeing the dragon, despaired because they could not stand against him. People are trying to overcome the tree people, but they don't do well. Even magicians can barely cope. Vladika examines the battlefield from a bird's eye view. He sees a dragon and tree people. He does not understand how they ended up here. Then the man turns to Lulusha and tells her that he does not know what she did to the creatures, but victory will be for them in any case. The goddess asks what the Lord means, and the man points his finger at the sky. A bright yellow portal forms in the sky and the Lord's guard flies out from there. One of them, Catherine, says that they came here on the orders of the Lord in order to destroy opponents. Dalkin has 4 members of the guard and thinks that this elf lord planned to destroy the world tree. Lulusha says that she will not allow this to happen. The young man replies that if the girl does not suppress the force, she will go to the world of people, and then there will be trouble. The next second, a purple ray appears from the clouds, which attacks one of the guards. But she manages to notice it, so she parries the blow. Seeing this, Tauken realizes that the aggression of the sky is not enough to influence them. A young man opens the system and asks her to show the rules of the heavenly punishment of the human world. The rule says, if you reflect or break the law, your grief will not dry up, but only a new punishment will descend. The second punishment will begin after a while, and the power will begin to increase until the target is hit. Tao Tsan tells Lulusha that he has revised the law, and a new punishment will come very soon. But the girl hoped that the heavenly Tao would simply kill the guards. The young man replies that it will be difficult to have fun, but you can enjoy the view. A new thunderstorm is gathering in the sky again and much more powerful than the previous one. The guard does not understand why a new thunderstorm appeared, because it reflected the past one. Catherine understands that she needs to hurry. A dragon flies up on a stone wall and calls the guard by name. The girl turns around, and the dragon asks if she really wants to become an enemy of the world tree. Steam is coming out of the dragon's mouth. His eyes have turned red, which meant that the creature is furious. Catherine asks for forgiveness and says that this is an order from the Lord. Then the dragon advises the girl to take a closer look at this Randall. The monster does not believe that a man rightfully considers himself a master. After these words, the girl gets into a pose for striking. She asks the dragon not to insult the Lord. Catherine orders the rest of the girls from the guard to protect the Lord's possessions, and she, in turn, promises to deal with the world tree. The girls take the order and fly away. In the next second, the dragon calls Catherine's behavior arrogant. The dragon assures the girl that he will be able to defeat her, even if he is slightly weakened. The guard, in turn, replies that even in the heyday of the dragon's power, she has nothing to fear. Suddenly, the whole sky turns emerald. The dragon's eyes turn even redder. The strongest wind rises here. The monster raises its wings and promises to quickly deal with the girl. Catherine, in turn, raises her gun and flies to the attack. One day, a tall dark tower with many floors appeared in the very center of the city. She broke through the ground with a roar, towered majestically into the heavens, terrifying everything around with her dark aura. It was the end of the world. The people of the city gathered near the televisions and watched as the worried presenter, with obvious fear in her voice, told about the misfortune that had befallen their city. While people were calling what was happening an apocalypse and a catastrophe, the tower appealed to them. A new message came to people, which said that if people want to prevent the fall of humanity, then let them respond to the call of the tower. Those who had the power and deserved to resist the tower responded to her call. Armed to the teeth, people who sincerely wanted to save their world enthusiastically shouted that it was in the name of humanity. Such people who decided to become defenders were called the Wanderers of the Tower. The floors of the tower were filled with crowds of various scary monsters. Their eyes were filled with bloodlust, which did not subside, but only grew each time. They attacked the Wanderer of the Tower in droves, who easily chopped them into pieces, moving up the floors. A certain object appeared in front of the conquerors of the tower, a blue and shiny stone. It was a revolving stone that allows the user to reverse time and return to the moment of summoning to the tower. The stone saved the user's memory. Also, it could be divided into parts and used separately. One of the Wanderers of the Tower took it from his hand and unshakably said that he would use it and then tell everything. In the name of use, the stone shone very brightly, illuminating the entire floor with light. The light was so bright that the others turned away, closing their eyes. When they opened their eyes, they realized that the user of the revolving stone had simply disappeared. At first, people had only two choices, to rise or die, but now there was a chance to return. Many Wanderers of the Tower, realizing that they would not be able to contain such hordes of monsters, shouted that they had no choice and used a revolving stone. Many Wanderers decided to return. The two Wanderers of the Tower stood and tried hard to rest. They hoped that these monsters were the last. Returning to the past allowed us to compensate for failures and mistakes. On one of the floors there was a huge scary monster spewing liquid magma from its huge mouth. The Wanderer struck a blow, after which wearily leaned on the sword. He turned his head back and heavily told his friend, Yongwon, that he needed to move on. He saw Yongwon sitting at the floor support with a revolving stone in his hand. The Wanderer approached his friend and angrily said that did he also decide to leave. Yongwon raised his head and looked at his friend. Smiling, he apologized to him. The remaining Wanderer of the Tower alone was called Chaven. Chaven could not understand what would happen to the real world that the others had left. Opening the gates of the next floor, from which a wild cold and death immediately blew, he firmly decided that he would not return to the past. A huge ice dragon in a creepy voice admitted that Chaven is an outstanding person, because for the entire time of the tower's existence, no one has dared to climb to the 99th floor alone. Chaven grabbed his sword. He promised himself that, remaining in the present, he would continue to rise. Someone was sitting behind the monitor, which showed everything that was happening in the tower. This someone rather exhaled and, spreading out in a toothy smile, said that this time it would be possible to harvest a rich harvest. It was a calm early day outside. Birds were singing and sitting on the wires of high-voltage power lines. Chaven, who is in the grocery store, reached for one of the packs of chips. On the TV, weighing in the store, it was reported that lately, because of the yellow dust, it is difficult to see a clear sky. The pack of chips that Chaven took turned out to be full of holes and its contents fell to the floor. Chaven exclaimed in surprise, thinking that it was just a mirage. His little sister, who looked out from behind the shelf, was shocked. The little sister asked in distress if her brother was a thief and was trying to eat chips unnoticed. These, by the way, were her favorite chips. Chaven briefly replied that he did not, and began to collect what had fallen out. The news kept saying that today is not the best weather for a walk. Suddenly, the TV presenter began to say loudly that an earthquake had been recorded in the vicinity of Seoul, while the magnitude was small and there were no casualties. But monitoring agencies reported that the magnitude was increasing and asked to take countermeasures in advance. The chips that fell to the floor jumped noticeably on the spot. People started shouting on the street, pointing their fingers and filming something happening on their phones. The noise that filled the streets drowned out the news broadcast on TV. Chaven stared out the window of the store. People gathered in the street shouted. In the center of the street, the ground began to crack. A column of dust rose, and pieces of earth flew in different directions with a roar, knocking people off their feet. A huge dark tower emerged from the ground, gnawing into the sky. Little sister Chaven snuggled up to him. Tears welled up in her eyes. Due to the strong rumble and earthquake, the ceilings in the shops crumbled. People who were also in the store said that everything would be fine, because they called an ambulance and she would arrive soon. Chaven covered his sister with himself and hugging her to him, asked if she was all right. She answered with fear in her voice that yes. Looking out from behind Chaven, she asked what was going on there. Looking around, they saw that the buildings and streets were partially destroyed. There was a mess all around. England, Japan. Unidentified objects began to appear all over the world, including Seoul. People called them the Towers of Nightmares, and many received a strange message. It said they were being congratulated because they had been chosen by the Wanderer of the Tower. The message asked if they were accepting the call. 2 buttons were lit next to the text, one accept, the other refuse. Many people pressed the button with interest and without even thinking, agreeing to accept the challenge and becoming wanderers. The message began to glow brightly and they were transported to the first floor of the tower. People who accepted the call and got into the tower received support from the interface system in the form of weapons, armor and gold coins, and became able to acquire skills and items, just like in a computer game. But they quickly realized that it wasn't a game at all. A lot of people got to the initial floor, the walls of which were filled with videos on which the outside world was broadcast. The interface said that soon the influence of the tower will appear in their world. The travelers watching the video looked at the people who were around the tower and wondered how the tower actually looks from the outside. Workers were pulling construction resources and equipment to the tower. One of them suddenly exclaimed, pointing to one of the floors of the tower. The figure of a woman could be seen in the window of the floor. The workers were surprised how the man got there and began shouting that it was dangerous there, and they needed to call the police or 119 as soon as possible. But the girl who appeared in the window was a very unusual girl. It was a monster with a toothy inhuman mouth and long claws. Coming out into the light, her mouth spread in a terrible smile, and when she growled, monsters began to run from behind her with a roar. The attack of monsters from the tower was the very influence reported by the tower interface. A siren wailed in the city, telling the population about the alarm. But the first pillar with microphones suddenly exploded, lighting up the street with fire. Tanks were pulled up to the tower, which opened fire on the monsters, but everything was to no avail. Some monsters, moving quickly, dodged shots, and some, larger and stronger, destroyed military equipment. After a certain period of time, the city looked devastated. There were no lights on the streets, collapsed buildings, and a lot of abandoned and destroyed equipment. 1/3 of the population was destroyed by monsters from the towers. The people inside them could only watch powerlessly. A new message appeared in the tower, which again repeated that they had been chosen by the Wanderers of the Tower and the saviors of humanity. Hope appeared in the hearts of people. They shouted that they needed to get up, because it was written there that they could save the world. The Wanderers decided that they would do everything in their power. Those who received special skills became the last hope for humanity. To stop the complete extermination of people, the Wanderers went to conquer the tower. Using the equipment and skills that the interface gave out, they engaged monsters in battle. The Wanderers ran into a huge stone that blocked the passage. Their opinion was divided. Some believed that it was not so easy for them to get through here, while others did not see the problem and suggested simply splitting a huge stone. One of the Wanderers struck a stone with a mace, and it broke, when suddenly something attracted the attention of another. The Wanderer pointed out to the commander a piece of stone that had broken off, which shone pleasantly with a blue light. The interface indicated that this is a revolving stone that allows the user to reverse time and return to the moment of summoning to the tower, while the user's memory remains intact, and also, it can be divided into fragments and used separately. The Wanderers were surprised that it was possible to return to the past. Someone exclaimed that this was some kind of cheating. Hwang Incheon, the commander of the Tower Wanderers, interrupted everything and said that he would use the stone and then tell everything. The stone glowed very brightly, forcing the others to squint and turn away. When the light died down, everyone saw that the commander had really disappeared. The Wanderers wondered if the commander would be able to return. It was suggested that even though he was in the past, he probably should then return to the present, just like Captain America. Sakamoto, a former scientist, adjusted his glasses and said that this was the way it should be and he had definitely returned to the past of this world. But the time discrepancy led to the fact that we would no longer be able to meet him. Sakamoto explained what was happening based on scientific theories, including the theory of the multiple universe and the theory of parallel universes. He said that the current situation is a state in which the time branches of the universe are divided, which means that at the moment when Hwang Incheon went to the past, their world and the world to which he was transported were divided. The travelers were shocked by what they heard from the scientist. Sakamoto continued, saying that one thing they know for sure is that Hwang Incheon has gone to the past. But despite this, the present of this world does not change. As far as everyone knows, information about objects has never been false, and this stone forks time and returns them to another world. but this is just a hypothesis, because it is possible that the people who use the stone fall into the same time period. He summed up the monologue by saying that the objects in this tower go beyond their understanding. Meanwhile, in the outside world, the second influence of the tower occurred. The sky rumbled and filled with black thunderclouds, in which lightning flashed all the time. When the clouds hung over the tower, a huge lightning struck directly on its roof. After the lightning strike, many loud footsteps were heard. A new wave of monsters surged out of the tower, surpassing the first in size. Until humanity on Earth was destroyed, the Wanderers had to make a choice: use the stone and return to the past, or stay and die. The Wanderers could not contain the monsters that were staying with every minute. The floors were filled with cries of pain and requests for help. The Wanderers used the revolving stone because they understood that they had no choice, and yet, everything went wrong in their lives anyway. The sword of one of the Wanderers broke, and he just stood there in fear. Before using the stone, his friend apologized to him and said that he saw no other way out. The Wanderer fell to his knees, and the monster in front of him growled loudly and wanted to attack. Then a swordsman appeared, with 2 of his blades. He quickly chopped a huge monster into pieces. Then he ran up to the Wanderer and with a kind expression on his face asked if he was all right. Another group of Wanderers came. They asked in surprise if everyone had run away. They despised such people. They thanked the only remaining Wanderer from the previous group for holding on to the end and not running away. There were people who did not rely on the stone and wanted to protect the present, not the past. It was a suicide squad called Carpe Diem, which translated from Latin as catch the day, live in the present. The Wanderers were scattered on the floor, which was covered with blood. Chavin lay buried in stones and moaned in pain. He could not understand where their mistake was. With pain in his body, he grabbed the hilt of his sword. Yunwen was already flying at a monster hovering in the sky that looked like a witch, and shouted for the monster to pay attention to him. Yongwen shouted to Chaewon that now was the time. At this time, just at the right moment, the fool, shouting so that his friend would not worry, flew at the monster from behind. Friends shouted that it was time for the monster to die, and struck him from both sides, cutting him into small pieces. After the battle, Chaewon asked if there were any dead. Yunwen happily said that fortunately, no, and the wounded will recover after they rest. After looking at their squad, the friends waved to them, and Yongwen said that at this rate they were able to get to the last floor. They happily waved back. Chaewon looked thoughtfully at the floor. On the floor he saw the sword of a real dragon, the sword of the owner of the 85th floor, which was forged for 1,000 days and nights to slay the dragon. The sword also had the energy of the sun and moon. Chaewon approached the sword. Picking it up, he began to examine it contentedly, rejoicing that a powerful weapon also fell out quite by the way. Mentally agreeing with Yunwen, Chaewon, looking at his new weapon, admitted that perhaps they could really get to the last floor. Chaewon, covered in abrasions, said he thought everything would go smoothly. With horror in his eyes, he looked at the terrible monster from the flaming jade room, 98th floor. A huge monster with an open mouth, from which steam was coming out abundantly, which was ready to attack. Seeing all this horror, what the monster did to his squad, and how he destroyed all their powerful weapons in one fell swoop, Chaewon could only watch what was happening, unable to move. With one crushing blow, the monster threw the fool into the wall, so that a large dent was left on it. Chaewon, almost choking on his own blood due to the collision with the wall, began to lose consciousness. His last thoughts were that everything was in vain. Remembering all the good moments with his team, Chaewon recalled all the trials that they managed to go through together. He couldn't believe that they had come all this way to die so pitifully in this place. Exhausted and having lost any hope, Chaewon looked at the monster, which was preparing to finish him off, releasing lava from its open mouth. When suddenly Yongwen appeared behind the monster, with anger in his eyes, he attacked the monster. Chopping the monster into small pieces, Yongwen tried to shout to Chaewon, asking him to wake up. Chaewon, not believing his eyes, uttered the name of Yunwen with surprise, while he continued to shred the monster with all the hatred for the killed comrades. Yunwen wanted to say that he couldn't do it alone, when suddenly, the monster pierced him through with its horn. Chaewon watched in horror as scarlet and warm blood flowed from his friend's hands while Yunwen was pierced by the monster. Chaewon, with incredible anger, began to shout at his friend, calling him. The monster lifted off the ground with one sharp movement and with a terrible roar tore to the other end of the floor, piercing the wall with its horn. Watching the whole picture, the shocked Chaewon, with all the anger and hatred, clenched his teeth. Gathering his last strength, Chaewon picked up his weapon and headed towards the monster, pointing the sword directly in his direction. A strange white light began to appear from the tip of the sword, enveloping the stone next to the monster like a lasso. Surprised by this sight, Chavin asked himself what kind of light it was. But without finishing his thought, he flew towards the monster with incredible confidence in his abilities. Looking at all the devastation that remained after their battle with the monster of this floor, Chavin looked at the already harmless and lifeless body of the monster, from behind whose mouth steam was still coming out. Chavin was trying to catch his breath after a hard battle, greedily gulping air. Exhausted and tired, Chavin called his friend, who was sitting on the ground with his back against the wall. Seeing a serious wound on his friend's arm, Chavin was horrified and was about to say something. Suddenly, Yongwen interrupted him and apologized to him, trying to make it seem that these seconds were the last in his life. Chavin, watching this, remembered his friend, whose smile never disappeared in this cruel and dark tower. It was because of this that the Wanderers called him the Smiling Knight. This time the knight lost his smile. Chavin, holding back the pain of losing his friend, began asking him to leave before he changed his mind. Turning around, Chavin started to leave when suddenly Yongwen, clutching a stone in his hand, spoke. Yongwen was surprised that his friend had noticed. Yunwen realized that it was too late to use this stone. Yunwen knew that Chavin was much stronger than he initially thought, which is why he was confident that he could pass the last floor of the tower alone. Yunwen was glad that there was a person like Chavin in this world. While Yunwen was thinking about it, he had already arrived at the tower window. Sitting on the edge of the window and squeezing his injured hand, Yongwen remembered his friend with a smile. He tipped over backwards and flew down, leaving a scarlet trail on the edge of the window. Chavin, having reached the door, almost opened it, but thoughts of a smiling friend did not leave him. Telling himself to go ahead, he pushed open the door to the next floor. A strong and cold wind blew out of the open door. Everything was covered in ice outside the door. These are permafrost lands. Chavin entered the room. Everything around him was imprisoned in ice. A terrible cold shackled his body. Because of the cold, breathing became heavy. Thick steam was coming out of the mouth of the Chavin. The monster guarding this floor opened its huge mouth and prepared to attack. Magic spheres began to fly out of its mouth, which, when they came into contact with the earth, bound it with dense ice. Chavin ran back, dodging the attacks. It was difficult to stand on such a surface, because of the slippery snow and ice. The monster screamed loudly in a nasty voice so that the fool would give up. From his roar, snow and ice particles flew towards Chavin. Cold breathed from the monster's mouth, which caused the skin on Chavin's arm to become covered with an ice crust. Smiling, Chavin replied with a grin that how could he, was the monster already tired of him. Suddenly, an explosion thundered in the place where Chavin was standing. The snow rose high. When the snow settled down, Chavin was no longer visible. Chavin was sitting in some kind of cave covered with ice, and behind its transparent walls a monster was visible, who was looking for Chavin with malice in his eyes. Chavin, restraining the pain, was breathing heavily and holding onto his hand, which was frostbitten due to the cold roar of the monster. The ice dragon, continuing to look around, asked in the same nasty voice if Chavin was going to play hide and seek again. Chavin was visibly nervous. Sweat was running down his face, which almost immediately froze. It's been 10 years since Chavin was able to arrive on the 99th floor. There were a lot of dangers before the 98th floor, too, but what he was facing now couldn't be compared to anything. Chavin opened the vial and began pouring some kind of potion on the wound. Chavin squeezed a piece of cloth in his mouth so as not to cry out in pain and not give away his location. Then, when Chavin joked about the boss of the 99th floor, his name is the Ice Dragon Velkaizos, he apparently got very angry and attacked him with an ice ray. The snow and ice rose due to the effect of the ice armor given to Chavin by Yunwen. Chavin sat and looked at his equipment. He realized that if it were not for the items of other wanderers that he managed to find, he would have been dead long ago. The thought made him sad, but at the same time he was grateful to them. Of the equipment, Chavin had a real dragon sword from the 85th floor, an ice armor that Yunwen gave him, and a Fire King bracelet. Looking at the bracelet, he felt very hurt in his soul. He closed his eyes and remembered Han Soil. Chavin is angry with himself, because if he was even a little stronger. He gripped the bracelet tightly and remembered an unpleasant moment from his life. It was Han Soil, lying in blood on one of the floors of this cursed tower. Then a voice shouted to Chavin, who was urgently calling him. Bad memories and thoughts immediately receded. Chavin, sitting at the table, looked up with interest and apologized for not answering right away. The man who worked on the anvil asked him if he had decided to try again. Chavin quietly agreed and added that this time he would definitely be able to pass. He lifted the mug of drink to his mouth. Atopo's blacksmith Jay exclaimed joyfully. That was good news. The village where Chavin was located was founded after the destruction of the dragon Altaminos, the boss of the 50th floor. Every day there were more and more dead and wounded, but people did not lose hope. The priests organized a rescue group that searched for and rescued the incapacitated, and the blacksmiths of the village, in order to help the wanderers who fought for humanity, repaired their equipment for free. After drinking some of the contents of the mug, Chavin said that now there were no blacksmiths left in the village, except for Jay. Working hard on the sword, Jay replied that there was nothing to be done, and he also had only a fool from his clients. Jay added that materials from the lower floors have stopped arriving recently, although there were supplies of minerals a couple of months ago. Chavin thought grimly that it was all because there were almost no survivors left in this tower. Chavin didn't even know what year it was in their world. Until today, there have been more than 10 influences of the tower, and from some point on, new wanderers stopped appearing on the first floor. With sadness in his voice, Chavin said that probably the entire population of the earth had already died. Jay said nothing and exhaled heavily. Jay didn't say anything for a while and asked if Chehan noticed anything strange while walking around this tower. Chehan suddenly remembered that there was a very strange inscription at the spot where the revolving stone was found, which said that the tower was inside the tower, a nightmare within a nightmare. Chehan clutched his head, not understanding who had left it and what it even meant, but he told Jay that he hadn't seen anything special. Jay sadly said that yesterday Granny Hayron disappeared. Chavin could not believe what he had heard. People don't age in the tower, so someone's disappearance can be explained by two things. Either a person went to the past, or jumped off the tower. Granny Hayron from Elixir's Hayron and Jay from Jay's workshop were one of the few wanderers of the auxiliary class. Jay continued to work, saddened by the loss of Granny Hayron. Chavin asked Jay to teach him the blacksmith's skill. Jay froze in surprise, and Chavin calmly got up and headed to the workplace with a smile on his face. Later, Chavin returned to the boss of the 99th floor. The ice dragon Velkaizos asked in a nasty voice if Chavin had decided to stop hiding. Velkaizos thoughtfully said that during the entire existence of the tower, no one has dared to climb alone to the 99th floor. Velkaizos said he recognizes Chavin because he is an outstanding person. Chavin exhaled with a smile. He could not imagine that the last person to recognize him would not be a man, but a monster. Chavin said that after such flattering words, he was sorry to kill him. Velkaizos replied that he did not want to disappoint Chavin, but he would not succeed. Chavin bared the blade of his sword and defiantly asked if the dragon really thinks so. Chavin took a stand and said in a serious voice that the vaunted armor of the ice dragon began to crumble a little. Velkaizos, hearing the words of Chavin, flew into a rage. He called him a cheeky little man and opened his huge mouth, preparing for an attack. While the dragon was saying that the games were over, Chavin had already jumped towards him with incredible speed. The attack of the ice ray of the dragon hit the Chavin and he flew violently into the icy rocks. Blood splashed in different directions. Chavin was badly wounded. Velkaizos, looking at Chavin, said in a nasty voice that he saw that he had decided to fight to the end. Velkaizos said that even if Chavin could hold out, he would still not be able to escape from fate, and in the end emptiness and loneliness would await him. Ice magic, in the form of the wanderers of the tower, began to bind the body of Chavin with its fetters. Chavin called out to the dragon and panting, holding back the pain, said that he was talking too much. Chavin cut the ice bonds with his sword and rushed to the attack with rage in his eyes. Velkaizos menacingly told Chavin to stop pretending to be strong and give up, because he would not be able to defeat him with such skills. Chavin started exploring the tower later than other wanderers, and therefore missed his chance to get hidden skills, hidden class, and other advantages. Therefore, I decided to abandon the accumulation of various skills and focused only on one thing. On the lunge after lunge, he practiced this technique. With the help of a lunge, he killed so many monsters that they began to call him that. He could feel the lunge changing him. He became stronger, faster, more accurate. With one lunge, he nailed the opponent through and through. Because of this, the lunge was no longer just a skill. His attack power has reached the level of hidden skills. In addition, so formally, the lunge was not a hidden skill, so he can use it without spending mana. And even so, it was still hard for him. Chavin has hit the dragon so many times, and there are only a couple of scratches on it. Velkaizos opened his mouth to attack. Chavin realized that it would be too late to evade. Then he noticed some strange, hard-to-see light on the dragon's face. He guessed he had seen such a light on the 98th floor at the Flaming Jade. If it was really him, then Chaewon gripped his sword tightly and took aim, shouting furiously, preparing to attack. Chaewon hit the dragon with all his might. The monster's legs gave way, the light intensified. Ice pieces of the dragon's face flew in different directions. Chaewon landed on the ground and looked at Velkaizos. Velkaizos shouted furiously that how dare a fool. The dragon was missing one eye. Instead there was a black hole, and the entire left side of the face was terribly disfigured. Chaewon grinned and said that this was not enough either, because he planned to chop off his entire jaw. Velkaizos angrily asked if Chaewon was so confident in himself, since he had wounded him only once. The dragon flapped its huge wings and took off, saying that it would put an end to this now. He began to attack Chaewon with ice rays. Practically without stopping, he barely dodged. Chaewon was annoyed that it was an air attack again. Chaewon realized that he had no chance of winning. He stumbled and fell to the ground. The dragon landed with a crash right in front of him and said in his menacing and nasty voice that he was sorry. If there were 10 of the same heroes here, they would be able to defeat Velkaizos. Hearing the words of the proud monster, who already had half of his jaw missing, Chaewon angrily ordered him to shut up, but as if not hearing the hero, the monster continued to speak. Chaewon was shocked to hear that if people had not succumbed to the Stone of Nightmares and if there were a dozen more such heroes, they would have easily been able to escape their sad fate. Not believing his ears, Chaewon asked what Velkaizos wanted to say, not understanding what this monster meant. Ignoring the guy's question, the monster began to deliver its crushing blows again. Noticing the monster's attack in time, Chaewon gathered his strength, jumped away from the monster's paw passing nearby and rushed to the exit. Noticing this, Velkaizos growled, angry that he could not finish off the young man. Greedily sucking in air and restoring strength, Chaewon looked at his health scale, which was already at a minimum. He continued to think that if the dragon's claws had reached him, he would have died there for sure. Remembering the words of Velkaizos about the Stone of Nightmares, the guy, covered in sweat and abrasions, began to gradually understand what the monster was talking about. 5 years later, this mighty and proud keeper of the floor was crushed. Along with the victory over the monster, a large number of notifications began to arrive about the new title, about getting the maximum amount of experience, about getting the maximum level, about physical development, and about increasing dexterity. After a flurry of alerts, Chaewon sighed wearily and completely without interest, sitting on another defeated enemy. The young man, deciding to find out again about the nightmare stone that was bothering him from the still-living Velkaizos, rudely ordered him to speak. The monster, without giving any specific answer, said that the guy already knows the answer and the whole truth will be revealed on the top floor. With these words of his, he further confused the already incoherent thoughts of Chaewon. Chaewon was looking at a new artifact. It was an ice dragon sword that contained the breath of an ice monster. Chaewon received it after defeating Velkaizos. He stared at the artifact with incomprehension, surprised that this weapon looked more like a dagger than a large and dangerous sword. While Chaewon was looking at his replenishment in the arsenal, the black liquid on the ice began to stir and boil. Soon it turned into a passage to the long-awaited 100th and last floor. With complete confidence and determination in his eyes, Chaewon headed straight for the aisle. He gradually disappeared into the dark curtain of the newly formed door, leaving behind the ice blocks of the 99th floor. After Chaewon entered, the door disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. Sticking his head out of the impenetrable haze of the passage, Chaewon began to look around the new floor. He saw a lot of monitors that opened up a view of the entire tower. All the images were familiar to Chaewon, such as the summoning room at office. Then the flow of thoughts of Chaewon was interrupted. The voice seemed not to expect to see him so soon and said that he thought he would go to the village first. Not expecting to hear someone, the hero automatically stood up in a stance and prepared to draw his sword, looking cautiously in the direction of the voice. Something from the shadow asked Chaewon to wait while it was preparing something and offered him a little rest. While Chaewon was perplexed by what was happening, he received a notification congratulating him that he was the first to complete tutorial 294 and that his outstanding achievement would forever be recorded in the Eternal Library. Chaewon stood in perplexity, unable to move. He did not understand what was happening and what kind of tutorial it was. He was thinking about his no longer living comrades. A flood of memories flooded into his head. The voice, seeing his shocked state, spoke again. Trying to calm the guy down, the voice asked him not to take everything to heart, otherwise the flow of feelings would drown him. The owner of the voice began to appear from the shadows. It was a strange monster, unlike the others. It can be described as a man with the head of a black lion. He was dressed in a serious suit, and his eyes were burning bright yellow. The monster started talking again about how it was already too late, and with self-respect pitied the guy, saying that for a human he did well. But when he saw that the tsunami that began to overwhelm Chaven, he did not care. The monster fell into a stupor. At this time, Chaven was looking at the lion without any interest. The monster was shocked that Chaven had recovered so quickly. The wary Chaven wondered who it was. The monster, remembering that he forgot to introduce himself because of the joy that he had met Chaven, began to fumble and worry. After all, Chaven was the only one who could reach the 100th floor, and even alone. Finally, the monster introduced himself. This mysterious creature with the head of a lion was a demon named Beastrain. Beastrain was the master of the Tower of Nightmares, which Chaven had just passed. Chaven continued to worry about the fact that if he had just passed the tutorial, then there was a game based on it. Beastrain, with a contented grimace, began to praise the wits of Chaven and wanted to show him something. He clicked his clawed paw and monitors appeared behind the lion, on which it was broadcast how Chaven and his former team got into the tower. On the recording, an incomprehensible squad of Chaven was visible. Chaven noticed himself in the crowd of these people. He could hear their conversation about whether Chaven would mind if Soil went with them, because the 3 of them are much better and safer than the 2 of them. On other monitors, Chaven saw how he and his team met more and more new people from different places, how they all talked a little about themselves and got acquainted, gathering more and more new comrades. The smug demon, as if mocking the fool, talked about how the guy was probably glad to see the faces of his comrades, whom he would not see again. The monitors began to show sad moments with the loss of each comrade. Suddenly, a black-haired girl with a sword, covered in blood, whose name was Soil, attracted the attention of Chaven. In the video, she asked Chaven with a smile to stop looking at her and start fighting. But immediately after that, they showed footage of her last moments of life, where Chaven held her limp body and tearfully asked her to open her eyes. Beastrain continued to mock, saying that at this point he was crying himself. Another fragment was already showing on the monitor, which showed Yongwin in his last moments of life, asking for forgiveness from Chaven. After watching all the monitors, the demon tried to find out if Chaven remembers the feelings that haunted him as he passed the tower, that sadness, rage, and regret. Beastrain, with a snarl on his face, exclaimed that all those feelings he had experienced should stay with him. Only then will he be able to give him a new chance to start this game from the beginning. The demon thought this was a great offer for a fool, because in the human world this can only happen in a novel. Start all over again, preserving your memories. Chaven could not believe what he had heard. He thought that this was the end, and as soon as they passed the tower, the world would be saved. Remembering the first notification I received with congratulations that Chaven was chosen as a wanderer of the tower who can save the world, Chaven realized that it was all a hoax from the very beginning. He thought that it was impossible to stop the influence of the tower. They have been fighting all this time against something that cannot be defeated. The savior of humanity should never have appeared. Throwing back the abyss of thoughts, Chaven, with full determination in his eyes, turned to the demon, saying that Beastrain already knows that the young man is not going to return to the past. Hearing this, the demon laughed nervously, and at the same second, his head grew in size. Opening his fanged mouth, he headed towards the Chaven. Looking at the guy, Beastrain decided to explain everything to him in more detail. He said that no object on the whole great earth could send him into the past, because there is no object with such properties. Chaven did not understand what this demon was carrying, because he had seen the stone himself. Before he could think of the sentence, Chaven suddenly remembered the words of the keeper of the 99th floor, Valkyzos, that if humanity had not succumbed to the deception of the Nightmare Stone, they would have managed to escape their terrible fate. With horror and realization in his eyes, Chaven remembered about the white stone they had received. Seeing the expression on the guy's face, Beastrain decided to briefly explain everything that all this time, it was not a stone of return, but a stone of nightmares. Everyone who used the stone did not come back, but only got stuck in a terrible nightmare. Before the 77th floor, the demon could not have imagined that there was a race so obsessed with returning to the past, because only humans could be so stubborn. It was clear from the lion's face that he was very amused by everything that was happening. Completely ignoring the Chaven trying to say something, the demon continued to repeat his own. He was sure that Chaven would make the right choice and start the main game. But as soon as an alert icon popped up in front of Chaven and asking if he would go through the game further, the guy immediately pressed the no button. Seeing this, Beastrain's eyes bulged as if he didn't believe what was happening. Chaven began to thank the demon, because thanks to him he understood the essence of this tower. Immediately after that, an alert appeared behind the shocked lion, where information about the subject with the name Tower of Nightmares tutorial was written. Chaven, with full determination in his eyes, reminded the demon that he was already in the nightmare of the tower, which means that if Chaven kills Beastrain, he will move to the next floor. Chavin firmly grasped the hilt of his sword and slowly pulled it out of its scabbard. He said emphatically that if he killed Beastrain, he would move to the next floor. Beastrain, tired of explaining everything, said that there was no next floor and they were at the top of the tower. Chavin replied that he did not believe a single word. Beastrain asked if Chavin really wanted to get a reward for cleaning the floor, and added with a laugh that it was unlikely that the thirst for a reward took hold of him so much. Chavin did not let him finish and with his signature lunge took off Beastrain's head. The monster's head fell at his feet with a thud. Beastrain thoughtfully stretched out that in fact, but then, having changed his mind about talking, he agreed and asked what Chavin wanted. Maybe some hidden object or a hidden skill. Beastrain was ready to give Chavin anything he asked for, because he deserved it. Chavin rudely replied to the cut that he didn't need anything. Raising his mangled head, Beastrain asked if Chavin did not want to return home. Beastrain said he thinks that Chavin has already realized that the tower is a complete nightmare, which means that nothing happened outside. Not believing in the words of the monster, Chavin, stammering, asked what it meant. Then he heard a conversation between two girls behind his back, connected with the lateness of one of them. He turned his head in the other direction and saw a group of guys who were talking about tickets. Chavin, not believing his eyes, asked what it was. Beastrain laughed slowly and said that at last Chavin began to understand everything, that no one was killed. Beastrain thoughtfully asked if it wasn't amazing. Peeping into the phone of some person, Beastrain added that for such a brave hero, this should be good news. Beastrain snapped his finger, saying that he almost forgot the most important thing. They moved back to some place. There were voices that said that the patients were still unconscious. Chavin looked around the dark room, in which there were many hospital beds with people. Chavin approached his body, connected to a life support device, and asked if it was really him. Beastrain asked if it wasn't amazing. He also explained that many years had passed in the tower, and only a month had passed in his world. Crossing his arms over his chest, Beastrain haughtily said that Chavin could not win anyway, even though he had passed the entire tutorial, because he was something more. This means that there is a difference between them, like between a man and a dragon. Chavin quietly said that it wasn't so big then, because he had already killed one dragon. Chavin drew his sword and stood in a stance, smiling. Beastrain mockingly said that Chavin is very self-confident, and Chavin has already rushed to the attack. The door creaked open, raking dirt and a layer of dust on the floor. A seriously wounded Chavin, holding bottles of potions in his hands, leaned out from behind the door and panting told Jay that he was here. It was very dirty in the workshop. The corners were overgrown with cobwebs. Chavin hopefully pronounced the name of the blacksmith. Still recovering from a hard battle, Chavin picked up a hammer and began to work hard on his sword. Chavin has been calling Beastrain to fight for 72 days and cannot even strike a single blow. He was glad that, at least, he had not died himself and sincerely did not understand why Beastrain was not going to kill him. Chavin decided that no matter how many days or years it took. Beastrain was sitting in front of the screen on the 100th floor and looking at Chavin. He tightly clenched his fist and told himself to hold on, because Chavin could be sold well. Beastrain called Chavin his special commodity. He thoughtfully raised his hand to his face and said that as a manufacturer, it was the first time he had seen such a person. The manufacturers must ensure that the goods safely take root on the Great Earth thanks to a two-stage processing process. In the first stage, the seeds are sifted out better. It is thanks to the tutorials that you can find a good product. In the main game, the processed seeds will begin to bloom violently. In other words, in the second treatment, our expensive sprouts are provided with water and fertilizer. Beastrain was angry that the seed refused to grow. He wondered if he could just be killed, because death in the tower does not mean that his soul will die. For example, after his death in the tower, Youngwon lives quietly in his own world. Beastrain became nervous that suddenly after death the seed would deteriorate. After such damage to the goods, the collectors will definitely not get rid of it. Beastrain gripped the corner of the chair tightly with his hand and decided that he needed to grow it well and sell it. Then he could become a demon of the highest class, and he still had to pay off the debt for the purchase of the tower. Beastrain was glad, because even the gods wanted to buy Chavin, even though they don't work with the demon world. Then the portal to the 100th floor opened. A Chavin flew out of it incredibly quickly and attacked the Beastrain. Beastrain calmly repelled the attack with his magic and asked what Chavin wanted, because he must have some kind of motivation. Chavin kept hitting and hitting, but it was unsuccessful. Beastrain again asked if it was time to give up. Beastrain tried to persuade him, saying that if Chavin moves into the main game, it will be better for him. Then there is no point in resisting. Beastrain was angry that Chavin did not respond to his persuasions and snapped his finger and pretended to laugh. After the click, the beast train disappeared. Chavin was shocked by this. Chavin noticed the presence of the enemy behind his back and quickly turned around to attack. But at that moment, an ice block flew into him with great force. Chavin coughed up blood. Beast train grabbed him by the neck and shouted furiously for Chavin to finally tell him what he wanted. Beast train was willing to give Chavin any hidden skills and hidden objects. He didn't understand why he was doing this nonsense. Chavin calmly replied that he wanted to kill him and move on. Beast train angrily shouted that he was hearing this nonsense again, and asked what he needed to do to get Chavin to agree to switch to the main game. Chavin realized that Beast train was caught and he finally ran out of patience. Chavin said that then he would ask him a question. A little later, Beast train sat and told Chavin in a serious tone that he did not want to frighten. But there are many different universes in the world. Chavin and Beast train were sitting across the table from each other. Chavin replied that he knew, because everyone on Earth knows the theory of multi-universes and parallel universes. Beast train was very surprised by this. Beast train said that if so, then he would move on to specifics. He began to explain that there is a main dimension called the Great Earth, and there are already many subworlds under it. The Earth, Chavana, is only a subworld existing among the rest, and she calls their planet Mir 294. Beast train continued that thanks to the Tower of Nightmares, wanderers upgrade their skills, accumulate items, and get used to the system of the Great Earth, getting a chance to go to a new world. Demons like Beast train look after the game and influence its course. Chavin menacingly asked why the demon was doing this. Beast train smiled all over his mouth and said that it was hard to say, and he didn't think it was really interesting for Chavin. Beast train snapped his finger. They found themselves in Seoul in front of the tower. The demon asked if he understood correctly that Chavin wanted to know why the tower appeared in his world. Beast train kept asking if Chavin wanted to know why he and his apprenticeship were destined for such a fate. Beast train smiled and said that the land was chosen absolutely by chance, to which Chavin interrupted him and said that was enough. Chavin menacingly said that he had asked a question, and repeatedly asked why Beast train was running the Tower of Nightmares. This question took the demon by surprise. He asked again uncertainly. Chavin again asked if Beast train would receive a reward for this. The demon hesitated and lied that it was more like charity. Beast train pretended to laugh and said that he could see that Chavin did not believe him. He began to try to convince Chavin, saying that in fact demons love charity and some of his friends are just quietly watching the wanderers, and some can interfere and help their pets. Then the Beast train received a message from the owner, which said that the product was not yet at the stage of maturation, so it could not be killed and negotiated. After reading it, Beast train realized that he had broken the rules. The demon asked Chavin again if he believed him, to which Chavin angrily replied that no. User information. Name, Chavin. Level, 100, the limit has been reached. Title, Conqueror of the 99th Floor. Class, Swordsman. Unique ability, Willpower. Status information. Strength, 100, the limit has been reached. Dexterity, 100, the limit has been reached. Survivability, 100, the limit has been reached. Will, 100, the limit is reached. Magic, 100, the limit is reached. Chavin was sitting on the 99th floor in front of the portal to the 100th floor and was considering his characteristics. He was drinking a restorative potion. He has nothing else to raise, but he still fails to win. He collapsed on the snow and exhaled. He suggested that the limit for all people might be the system of this world. Suddenly, he felt a lot of pain. He jumped up and clutched his chest. He could not understand what this strange feeling was. Then he noticed some strange particles that were flying in the air. Chavin thought it was an illusion and grabbed one such piece. They were spitting in the air and looked like pieces of stuck sugar, taking on new forms. Then Chavin instinctively realized that they were part of any world. That means it doesn't matter what form they take. Chavin angrily said that volunteering from the mouth of a demon sounds ridiculous. He noticed a message behind Beast train and asked who the owner was. Beast train was glad that Chavin finally became interested. He began to explain that the owners are the rulers of the Great Land, and the winners of the main game can go there and receive special patronage of the owners. Chavin asked what kind of special patronage it was. The demon agreed and said that the future of Chavin will change depending on which patron he chooses. Beast train hugged Chavin and put a claw to his cheek. The demon said that if he listened to him, then he, Beast train, could give him the word and choose someone really worthwhile as a patron. But of course, if the fool agreed to participate in the main game. Chavin looked wearily at the demon. Chavin told the demon that he was like a pesky salesman of some company. Beastrain asked with interest why this was so. Chavin, deciding not to answer the demon's question, said that he agreed to do as the demon wanted, but he would leave this place in exactly 10 days. 9 days later, Chavin has been training hard to do his signature punch lunge. The demon, who was watching him through the monitor, laughed, saying that Chavin only does what he trains. Beastrain wondered how much Chavin wanted attention. Beastrain couldn't wait to send Chavin to the main game and calmed himself down, saying that there was very little left. He regretted that he had gone along with the nightmares and bought this useless tower. Beastrain got angry and shouted that it was all because of the maintenance workers. He was told that the tower was built by a nightmare master and that this is the oldest building of the first generation of construction. A picture popped up in his head of how the tower salesman was telling him that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If it were a third-generation tower, he would be able to complete the tutorial with his own hands without harming the product in any way. Beastrain imagined how all the wanderers were surprised that there was no opt-out button. In this junk from the first generation, I can't do anything without the consent of Chavin, and Chavin stood his ground and refused, wanting to kill the demon and move to the next floor. Yes, nothing can be done. Poverty is the worst thing that could be thought of. Beastrain exhaled heavily and stretched out on his couch. He was sincerely glad that tomorrow everything would come to an end and he would send Chavin to the main game. Mandatory hints to start the main game. What is the Tree of Illusions? The origin of the root of the Tree of Illusions. The structure of the Tree of Illusions. The food of the Tree of Illusions. Summary information about the Great Earth. Increase adaptation. Complete tasks even if death threatens you. 12 attractive zones of the Great Earth, for which it is not a pity to die. Who are the owners of the Great Earth? 101 reasons to visit the Great Earth. A new message came saying that the game master wanted to finish the tutorial. The message suggested returning to the world of 294 without memory loss and starting the main game. Under the question of whether the user agrees, 2 buttons burned brightly, one yes, the other no. Beastrain happily asked if Chavin had learned everything he had sent him. Chavin, looking at the message in front of him, replied that, and thanked him. The demon has already endured and asked Chavin to agree faster. Beastrain began to rub his eyes and happily said that he had been waiting for this for a very long time, and from the overflow of feelings he would now start crying. At this moment, the sharp blade of Chavin's sword cuts into the demon's face and blows her to pieces. Beastrain menacingly asked what Chavin was doing, to which he replied that the demon himself understands everything perfectly, saying that right now he was going to kill him. Chavin rushed to attack. After the particles became visible, it became difficult for Chavin to make lunges. While striking, it's as if something stops him, as if a new feeling has awakened inside. Chavin skillfully dodged the demon's blows, striking more and more blows. Successfully conducting strikes, Chavin happily thought that maybe this is the taste of life. But then a magic circle appeared under his feet. Iron stems emerged from the floor and bound the body of Chavin. It was plants of the 91st floor, a forest of black iron. Restoring his body, Beastrain angrily said that he really sees someone like Chavin. It would have been much easier for the two of them if he had done so from the very beginning. The demon menacingly asked if Chavin agreed with him. Chavin, bound by iron stalks, asked what Beastrain would do now, because he could not finish the game without his consent. Beastrain agreed, but admitted that, to be honest, he no longer expects a voluntary consent from Chavin. This time it was Beastrain who wanted to ask a question. The demon asked how Chavin thinks why this tutorial keeps going on and on. Beastrain explained that the Mosquito Tower automatically closes the game 100 days after the end of the tutorial. Hearing this, Chavin was shocked. The demon kept saying that now he would just leave him here and he would quietly move into the main game. Chavin gripped the hilt of his sword tightly and said that in the great land of Beastrain they call a flattering gentleman. Hearing such information, the demon's eyes widened in surprise. Chavin went on to say that Beastrain lived 784 years and visited 128 worlds, all the while selecting and killing wanderers. Beastrain angrily asked how Chavin knew all this. Chavin asked if it was true that Beastrain wanted to give it to the collector under the name of the Black Lord. Visibly nervous, the demon asked Chavin who he was. Chavin smiled and asked who he was, because he was a commodity grown by him for several decades. Chavin conceived and said that, although there is no more, he hit the iron forest's bonds with force. Chavin, with a smile on his face, said that he was a commodity that had been grown for several decades by Beastrain. After thinking for a while, he added that there was no more and forcefully struck his sword against the fetters of the iron forest. From the strong impact, the floor, walls and ceiling cracked, and their stone pieces flew in different directions. Among the rising dust in a piece of the room, some kind of blue glow appeared. It was getting closer all the time, and it became clear that it was a Chewin flying towards the demon, preparing to attack. The blow landed on his left shoulder, and Beastrain became visibly nervous. Beastrain ran at Chewin to launch a counterattack, but Chewin easily beat off all his blows with his sword. The demon noticed that the wound on his shoulder was not recovering. He grabbed his sore shoulder and stopped, squeezing his shoulder to somehow calm the pain. Beastrain said that it was impossible. He looked at Chewin's sword, which had taken on a completely different look. Now it looked a lot menacing. The demon, not believing his eyes, asked if his sword was over-adapted, to which Chewin simply looked menacingly in response. The first day after reaching the 100th floor, Chewin began to doubt maybe this tower is also part of a nightmare. Doubted it was possible Beastrain just couldn't kill him. Doubted it was possible he had reached the limit for all people. Then these small particles began to gather into bizarre messages, one of which was addressed to the Black Lord and informed that the first selection would end very soon. After so many doubts, when he had nothing to think about. When Chewin had nothing to think about, he realized the lunge, his signature blow. Chewin attacked Beastrain with renewed vigor. His lunge was new, the lunge had great power, sweeping away everything in its path. With each new blow from Chewin, Beastrain became more and more nervous. Realizing that his business was bad, Beastrain got very angry and shouted one of the commands to the tower link. An inscription lit up in the air, which stated that all time restrictions had been lifted. After removing the restrictions, the Beastrain seems to have assumed its true form, because it already looked different. With all his anger, the demon rushed to the attack, shouting that he would not hold back anymore, and that the fool would surrender. Beastrain was hitting Chewin, continuing to shout that in order to master the second level of adaptation immediately after completing the tutorial, an extraordinary talent is needed. But Chewin is still a stupid person. Beastrain pressed on Chewin with more force, shouting, "He will never defeat him, Beastrain." Chewin tried to dodge, but the wounds on his body still became more. He wondered if this was how it would end. Chewin turned the hilt of his sword in his palm and gripped it tightly. Chewin began to strike back with incredible speed. The number of attacks he made during his entire stay to the tower almost reached 10 billion. Beastrain angrily shouted that the main game would start, so that the Chewin would not do it. When he made one of the strokes, the counter finally reached such a huge figure, something flashed in Chewin's eyes. Chewin dodged the demon's blow and jumped back. He remembered the floor keepers and realized, that's it. He lunged. His sword glowed with a bright light. Some blue particles began to appear around the sword. Beastrain, seeing this blow, angrily said that no, Chewin did not just adapt. The blow of Chewin reached the demon. Everything lit up with some strange golden light. Beastrain could not believe that this was happening. The demon screamed loudly in pain. Some kind of blue stream of energy gushed out of his wound, which swirled around him. Beastrain fell to the floor, and Chewin raised his sword over him, telling him to listen to him one last time. Chewin menacingly said that people are not so weak as to be ordinary pawns. People are not just a commodity on which you can bet and sell more expensive to whomever you want. Beastrain was lying on the floor, but he looked somehow strange. Chewin said that he was no longer going to follow the path they had prepared, and brought the tip of the sword closer to the demon's face. Looking up, he said he was going to go to the next floor. There was nothing left of the strong shell of the Beastrain. Now it looked like some kind of strange little bat with a lion's head. Chewin, looking at the crumbling ceiling of the tower, was going to go higher and higher until the world they had so carefully built came to an end. Chewin broke the tower system, and in his user information, there was no more information, only question marks. Beastrain begged Chewin to stop, because the next floor does not exist. Chewin replied that everything is just the opposite and he says it for a reason. Chewin began to remember that there were some strange inscriptions all over the Tower of Nightmares, because of which Chewin concluded that the Tower of Mosquitoes was only an imitation of the primordial nightmare that stands at the top of the Tree of Illusions. At first he couldn't figure out what the top of the Tree of Illusions was, but he realized one thing for sure, that these were the records of Mullark, the creator of the tower. The message said that the name of the Tower of Nightmares, is a tutorial. And the description said that those who responded to the tower's call would be placed in an endless nightmare. Chewin asked a rhetorical question whether he was right that this place is only the root of the Tree of Illusions. And if there is a root, then there is a trunk, and if it breaks through to the top. Beastrain did not understandingly ask what Chewin wanted. Chewin's sword lit up with a bright blue flame. He raised it above him and directed this powerful energy to the ceiling. D-Strain screamed loudly, realizing that his tower would be destroyed. The tower began to collapse. The system reported that the tutorial is temporarily closed. The system detected an error loading the tutorial, which is why the download was not completed. The system began to search for the wanderers of the Tower of Nightmares, but also found nothing. The system reported that the cleaning of the game failed and the tutorial is completed. Chavin opened his eyes. He was lying on some beach. There were palm trees around and the sun was shining brightly. Chavin exhaled heavily and got to his feet, looking around. Seeing strange footprints leading somewhere deep into the forest, Chavin said that he had finally found him. Suddenly someone's gray paw appeared. It was a pack of wolves, but they did not look like ordinary terrestrial ones. They were a couple of times larger and several times scarier. They surrounded Chavin with a roar. Their eyes were bloodshot and eager to finish off the prey as soon as possible. Suddenly one of the wolves rushed to the attack. Chavin calmly carried out a small lunge and punched the wolf in the stomach. But then the leader of this pack appeared, an unimaginably huge wolf with huge teeth and red eyes. The leader was so strong that the ground sank under his paws. Looking at the huge wolf, Chavin realized that a small lunge would not be enough for that big boy. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly and made a normal lunge. With this blow, he pierced the wolf's chest, from which he growled loudly. Chavin tore off their horns from the defeated wolves and came to the conclusion that the monsters here are somehow weak. Then he noticed something strange. Chavin looked to the side and saw some strange monsters that looked like people, but they were green and had some kind of antennae on their heads. One of these monsters screamed, poking at the fool with his finger, but his speech was not clear. But it seems he asked to immediately give the wolf's horn. Chavin, even with suspicion turned on, could not understand anything. Chavin pointed to the horn behind his back and said that he was offering a deal. He was giving them the horn, and they were giving it to him. But the monster did not let him finish and attacked. Chavin dodged the blow, and was not even surprised that he could not agree. The monster continued to try to hit Chavin, to which he, calling the monster an antenna, warned that if he did not stop, he would kill them all. The monster did not even think to stop and the fool, taking out his sword, chopped these monsters into small pieces. Chavin was sitting on one of the monsters and asked if he wanted to tell him where they were at all. Chavin presented a sword to the monster's throat, to which he shouted something barely legible. Chavin grabbed the monster by the antennae that were on his head and pulled on himself. The monster screamed, writhing in pain. Chavin asked again if the monster could speak normally, but in response he heard only screams. The monster screamed that he would definitely kill the fool, and bit off his tongue with his sharp teeth. Holding the torn-off antennae of the monster, Chavin asked the already dead monster why he bit off his tongue. Chavin thought they were just bugs, but they have an indomitable will. After looking at the antennas in his hands, Chavin dug them into the ground and went on. In the end, he didn't find out anything, but hoping to find something useful from them, he began searching the corpses of monsters. Chavin found a small backpack of dimensions, accommodating 2 cubic meters of space. After examining the bag, Chavin realized that this item works as an inventory. He was glad of this, because after leaving the Tower of Nightmares, the interface system no longer works. Everything stopped working at all. Putting the horns in a backpack of dimensions, Chavin said that he thought that such a thing was used everywhere on the Great Earth. A little bit resentfully, he cursed the deceiving lion. After examining the colorful stones that he collected from the monsters, he was glad that at least suspicion shows information about the items. After examining one of the stones, suspicion showed that it was a soul stone that increases spiritual energy. Each of the monsters kept one of these multicolored stones with them. Chavin suggested that they could be local jewelers. In any case, it was better to take these stones with you, and Chavin put them in a backpack of dimensions. Chavin said that he would not like to leave everything else here, but then he felt something strange. His sword began to vibrate. Chavin took out his sword and sat down in front of the equipment. He pointed the sword in front of the equipment, when suddenly the sword had a huge mouth, with which it began to devour the remaining equipment. Chavin was shocked by what he saw. After he left the tower, the sword behaved strangely. Chavin sat and watched the sword eat and thought, are they really so delicious? Chavin looked around at everything that was left after his sword had eaten, and noticed the map. He opened the map. In its upper part was written Tree of Illusions Chaos. Chavin did not understand what kind of chaos it was, because the demon did not talk about it. Somewhere in the depths of the forest, many footsteps could be heard. Another pack of horned wolves, tail between their legs and with fear in their eyes, was running away. Behind them ran a group of people, one of whom was a girl with red hair. The girl threw her blade and hit the man's knee. She pretended to put her hand to her mouth and apologized, saying that she accidentally threw it and she would rather hunt in the distance. The man replied that it was okay. The man got angry and decided that he would forgive her once, but only because of her charm. He hoped she wasn't so stupid that she'd hit him right in the knee by mistake. The girl apologized for something again, and the man shouted what happened there again. The ground shook under their feet. The members of the squad shouted that there was a two-horned one behind them. A huge two-horned wolf growled menacingly and rushed at the squad. The girl, laughing, ran away from him. Someone in the squad ordered everyone to step aside. Chavin watched them from the cliff. The girl seemed to him the strongest in the group, but it seems that the relationship in the group was not very good. He believed that because of such carelessness they would die and sincerely did not understand how they were able to pass the Tower of Nightmares. The man shouted for everyone to attack. He used the breath of the King of Fire. Flames began to spin around his body and weapons. The girl shouted that she would help him and flooded the man with water, from which all his fire went out. And he screamed. The girl laughed happily. The man turned to face her and called her names, to which she made an innocent face and said she just wanted to help him. The man looked at the girl and shouted that he did not need such help. At that moment, the wolf almost reached the man with its mouth. The squad members called him Hyan and shouted at him to be careful. Chavin realized that he needed to help them and jumped from the cliff to attack with lightning speed, flying from top to bottom. He lunged and pierced the head of the two-headed wolf through. Blood sprayed in a big stream in different directions and flooded Hyan's face. The dust that had risen from the impact gradually settled and the Chewin began to slowly appear there. Hyan shouted that who else is this? Chavin was standing right on the face of the defeated monster. The members of the squad asked Chavin if he was sure he didn't mind that they would take the body of the two-horned monster. Chavin was surprised that it was such a valuable animal. He asked if it was true that his horns were so valuable. The girl nodded in response. The squad, laughing, said that it usually takes at least 10 wanderers to catch a two-horned one. Chavin remembered that the wolf he killed had 5 of them and concluded that the more of them, the stronger the monster should be. The girl bit her long nail angrily. She stomped her foot menacingly and sternly asked who the fool was in general. Hearing this, Chavin paid attention to her. The girl went on to say that she didn't think there would be anyone in the chaos capable of killing a two-horned one with just a lunge. She asked who he was and how he got here. After looking at the girl, he came closer to her and asked, "What is chaos?" Hearing the question that Chavin asked her, the girl was shocked. Her eyes opened wide. The girl, surprised and loudly exclaimed, "Who is a fool at all?" They were walking through the forest, and the members of the squad questioned him. Hyan asked if it was true that his name was Chewin. Chavin agreed. Hyan asked if he was just passing by. Chewin agreed again. With some disbelief, Hyan asked if Chewin didn't even know the local language. Chewin agreed again. Hyan replied that it was very strange, because the language barrier is a rarity. The girl asked if everything was exactly right, because he was giving the whole corpse to them. Chavin agreed again. The girl was walking behind Chavin and did not believe that he was just passing by, especially since Chavin killed the two-horned one without even using skills. The girl tried to use the skill on him, but the system informed her that she could not use the skill. The girl was surprised that she could not even study it. The system reported that the search for information was impossible. She wondered again who he was at all, because judging by the spiritual energy, he was not an adapter. She seriously told Chavin that she was interested in something, and added that she didn't think there were so many guys in Chaos who could kill a two-horned one with just a lunge. The girl ordered him to tell who he was and where he came from. Chavin turned around and asked what Chaos was. The girl loudly asked if the fool was joking with her. He said no, then she screamed why he was asking such strange questions. The girl thought about it and said that since he didn't understand what she was talking about, maybe she was using too complicated words. Chavin replied that he understood what she was saying. He pondered the question of who he was and where he came from. His former life lost its meaning after coming to the tower, but in it he was able to find new friends and create new memories. A picture with the faces of his former friends swirled in his head. However, after leaving the tutorial, they also disappeared, like an illusion. Chavin suggested that his friends most likely now live on Earth, but if one of the rewards is the preservation of memory, they probably no longer remember either him or what happened in the tower. Chavin replied to the girl that he did not remember. She pretended to make her face cute and said she understood. But then she screamed and asked if Chavin really thought that she would be led to such a stupid excuse. She advised him to come up with a more convincing story, and not to compose it on the go. Chavin said he didn't remember saying he had amnesia. The girl asked what was wrong with him then. Maybe he was strong from the abyss. Chavin averted his eyes and wondered what else the abyss was. Chavin said they had had enough. His sword vibrated and he reached for it. He took out his sword, which opened its mouth wide. The girl, seeing this, was greatly surprised and realized that it was a weapon of the spirit. Chavin began to feed the weapons with equipment. The girl thought that he was not strong, but he just has a cool weapon and also demonstrates it so openly. One guy from the squad said with envy that Chavin seemed to be showing off his toys and it was very stupid. While Chavin fed the sword and told him to climb back quickly, the whole squad looked at him with envy. The girl was angry that Chavin also interfered with her task, which was to have the two-horned eat Hyan. She had an idea. She said she wouldn't bother him with questions anymore, but she wanted to offer something. The girl introduced herself by the name of Mino and after telling about the chaos, walked a little through her companions. These guys are the ruthless people of their Red Fox clan, including Hyan. Chavin realized that in short, Mino wanted him to kill them. Mino said that he would soon understand himself, because they would come for him. And she also told Chavin to stop staring at them. Hyan looked at the dark starry sky and said that it was already dark and they had better set up camp, because it was too dangerous to walk at night, because you could come across a horned one. Chavin sat on a tree and surveyed the area while the rest of the squad sat by the fire and was about to go to bed. Later, Chavin settled down under a tree and reflected that, judging by the map, there is a village nearby. Those golden particles appeared in the air again. Chavin grabbed one of them and squeezed it in his hand. He has moved to the second level of awakening, awareness. The guy approached Hyan and asked why Chavin had so little spiritual power. Hyan was surprised and replied that he knew it. They came to the conclusion that the Chavin defeated the two-horned only thanks to a strong weapon. But the weapon of the spirit can only be obtained in the abyss, that is, in the branches of the Tree of Illusions. Chavin guessed that they were coming up with a plan. He was wondering how they would react when they found out that he really got this weapon from the root. Although the tower demon said that this weapon was mediocre, but in this world it was apparently valued very highly. Chavin came to the conclusion that this is not a great land. Then he heard a lot of footsteps moving towards him. Chavin realized that they were coming. Nino leaned out of the bushes and said, "What's the matter with Chavin? They're coming." She picked him up by the collar and said that he had a gun, so he had to kill them all and that was it. Chavin replied that no, because he had given his weapon to some sentry. Mino screamed, how could he give up his weapon just like that? Hyan called Chavin and laughing, said that his weapon would serve him well, although the Red Fox clan doesn't care if you have a weapon or not. The clan members who came were surprised that Hyan called them all to deal with the two, but decided to deal with them quickly and return. Mino screamed angrily, have the fools not seen blood for a long time? Chavin smiled. He was glad that he would finally see her real ability. Mino prepared to attack. Hyan ordered the clan to attack, and the thugs rushed to the attack. Mino expertly launched 2 blades that hit the guys in the heads. 2 immediately fell to the ground. She knocked out the third one with a kick to the jaw, then grabbed another blade and launched the blade at another guy. Mino stopped and saw the guy fall to the ground with a blade in his forehead. Smiling, she apologized for throwing too hard. Mino said that she was just a little angry. At this time flying blades appeared around her. She smiled and said that now they would learn something really terrible. Hyan angrily said that he suspected when she accidentally pointed monsters at them. Now he had no doubt that she was a witch of destruction. Mino stared back confidently, preparing to attack. Hyan menacingly asked who needed the services of an assassin from the dark forest. Mino smiled and replied that it didn't matter, because the Red Fox clan had killed many adapters with their own hands. So there were a lot of people in the chaos who wanted them dead. Having finished, she launched the flying blades into the attack. Hyan laughed and said that he would never believe that the Dark Forest had agreed to stand up for some weaklings. He cut through the Mino blades that were flying towards him, taking the sword that belonged to Chavin. He smiled angrily and said that it was definitely a personal request and today she, the Witch of Destruction, would have to die. Mono sternly asked if Hyan really hopes to fight her by having a spirit weapon. Hyan laughed nastily and told her not to worry because he came prepared. Hyan began to consider the members of the Red Fox clan and came to the conclusion that they are at least at stage 1 of adaptation. The clan members were just everywhere. She quickly counted them and realized that there were as many as 40 of them. She said she knew X would be bigger. Hyan asked if the witch really thought that he would go without a safety net to the witch and the guy who easily killed the two-horned. Hyan looked at Chaewon and said that if he knew that he would give him his weapon so easily, then he wouldn't even have to call the master. There was a wild-looking man sitting on a tree. He had long red hair, a sharp tongue that he licked his lips with, and he had a weapon with long claws on his hands. Mino, seeing the master of the Red Fox clan, was surprised to tell the Black Fox that she did not expect to see him. Did he really have so much free time? The master jumped down from the tree and found himself in front of the Witch of Destruction. Their master smiled with all his teeth, which, by the way, were very long and sharp. He told the Witch of Destruction that she could consider it an honor. The Black Fox clanter was the master of the Red Fox and was in the third stage of adaptation. The Black Fox said that half of their clan had gathered to kill her alone. The clan members looked at Mino with wild eyes. The witch said that it was indeed an honor, but offered to wait a little longer since he was free. In fact, she doubted that she could beat him in a duel because he was at the third level of adaptation. The Witch of Destruction called out to Chavin, calling him Mr. Memory Loss, and apologized. She didn't want to say it, but she couldn't protect him. She threw him a rock and told him to take it and run. Chavin thought it was a nightmare stone. He asked what it was. Mino explained that it was a displacement stone, and with its help you could find yourself in the nearest citadel. She added that she had only one such stone, so he can leave. Chavin looked at the stone. This stone could not bring him back to the past, but it can save someone in the present. He gripped it tightly in his hand. He remembered Yonghwan and wondered what would have happened if this stone had been in their hands then. He was interested in the question of what would happen to Yunwan then and now. Chavin asked if the witch had the opportunity to return to the past, if she had returned. The witch got a little angry and said why he needed to ask such a question right now. But she still replied that, of course, she wouldn't come back. The witch explained that she did not have the easiest life, so if she dies, it will be only today and she will never go back to the past. Chavin approached the Witch of Destruction and lightly took her by the shoulder. He went ahead of her, took out his sword and said that she would not die today. Mino wanted to ask something, but she didn't have time. Chavin abruptly ran forward, from which the ground under him crumpled and scattered in different directions. Chavin ran and easily chopped down the members of the Red Fox clan. The Black Fox hysterically shouted the name of the skill 14 Flashes of the King of Fire. The whole clan ran into the attack with wild smiles, all the while shouting the name of the skill. Chavin said he was using the Flash of Oblivion. He accelerated at times and like lightning swept through the ranks of the clan, simultaneously cutting everyone right and left. Chavin drove his blade into the Black Fox at full speed, but he managed to substitute his gloves, which eventually cracked under the influence of Chavin's incredible strength. The gloves with which the Black Fox was covering his chest flew apart and Chavin drove his sword into his solar plexus. The Red Fox clan master's eyes widened and he screamed in pain. The Black Fox's body thudded to the ground. Seeing what had been done to their master, Hem became hysterical. Fear filled his body. Chavin walked up to him and stretched out his hand to take back his spirit sword. Shaking with unimaginable fear, the kneeling Hyan handed the sword to the owner. Seeing that Chavin, who had just slaughtered half of the clan and easily defeated their master, regained the Sword of Spirits, the remaining thugs began to run away. Chavin gripped his sword tightly in his hands and used a small lunge. A stream of blue energy broke out and flew towards the fleeing members of the Red Fox clan, chopping them. The eyes of the Witch of Destruction opened wide. She opened her mouth and could not say anything. She did not understand how a fool could do such a thing with an ordinary lunge. When Chavin agreed to give them the whole corpse, and even with horns, she thought that he was just a fool, completely careless, since he was so recklessly climbing into trouble. The witch realized that she was wrong, because he was just insanely strong. Chavin was standing with his back to her, and in front of him, after his small lunge, a rather deep ravine formed, the ground of which was blazing with fire. Mino called out to him. Chavin calmly turned his head. Mino stood with her eyes wide open. Being in the deepest shock, she asked who Chavin was. Chavin smiled and said, did she forget who he was? He claimed she knew who he was. Mino stared back blankly. Chavin, wiping his sword, pretended to laugh and said that she had really lost her memory, because he thought that only he had such a thing. After hearing this, Mino asked what kind of pettiness it was. She didn't understand if she was really offended by what she said. The witch stretched out her hand towards Chavin and asked him to give her the Stone of Return. Chavin replied that he had lost it. Mino screamed that Chavin had no idea how expensive he was, so he just told her to look for him if she wanted to. They built a new fire. Chavin sat and watched the starry sky. He could not understand why it was so quiet here. While Chavin was feeding his sword, Mino was hysterically rummaging through the Dimensions backpack, accusing him of losing such an expensive thing because of him. Chavin repeated to her that she knew everything. Mino asked what she knew about. Chavin explained that about him. He smiled and said he was human. Incredulous, Mino asked if he was joking. Chaven asked if she was human. Mino agreed. Clenching his fist tightly, Chaven replied that it was enough. Looking at Chaven, Mino couldn't figure out what was wrong with his face, and she was wondering if he really thinks that being human is enough.